Chapter 591. Li Yunxin took out the scroll from his sleeve and unfolded it. Is it this woman? Goddess Penglai glanced at it and nodded. Yes, yes, yes. Li Yunxin replied with an oh. And is she very, very tall, even taller than me? Her face is black and her eyes are red? The demon nodded again. Yes, yes, yes. Lu Baishui frowned and shouted, How dare you? Li Yunxin raised his hand to stop him and looked at the demon. Last chance. Staring at the dregs in his hand, Goddess Penglai suddenly jumped up and threw herself at Li Yunxin. Give it to me. When Goddess Penglai saw the dregs in Li Yunxin's hand, she took a step back vigilantly. But now, after 10 minutes, she suddenly changed her attitude. It seemed that she had lost her mind because of her strong desire. She overestimated herself and tried to snatch the dregs. Li Yunxin wasn't surprised by this. Demons? They couldn't be judged by human reason. If a cute puppy wagged its tail at its owner and growled at a passerby, would it be strange? Demons were the same. Compared with human beings, demons changed their emotions faster. Maybe it was because of their beastly nature. But this goddess Penglai. Li Yunxin realized that she seemed to have lost her mind because of the rebellion she mentioned. This demon must hate the so-called rebellion to the bone, or at least it left a deep impression on her. She lost her composure when she mentioned it. But how could she snatch it? With her current cultivation she was already at the emptiness realm. But in front of Li Yunxin she was like an ant. Before Lu Baishui made a move, Li Yunxin had struck with his palm. There was a trace of demonic power in his powerful palm. Lu Baishui didn't notice it, but the demon's expression changed. She knew that the power was so violent that she couldn't compete with it. His body, which had been pouncing forward like a wooden stake, swayed and fell straight to the ground. Her real body turned into a black fog and went straight for the crack in the door. Li Yunxin did not get up either. He lightly stomped his foot on the ground. All the cracks in the room immediately emitted a golden light invisible to the naked eye, forcing the black fog back. At this time, mortals could freely enter and exit the house, but for the demons, it had become an airtight cage. This goddess of Penglai did not believe it and jumped left and right for a while. When she had no other choice, she attached herself to the body of Li Si's zombie. She bounced up from the ground and stared at Li Yunxin viciously. Hey! It's not like I'm the one who destroyed your mother's boat. Ayaya, why are you looking for me? Hearing this, Lu Baishui and Li Yunxin looked at each other. Li Yunxin frowned. So you've met her? He shouted again. Speak. Otherwise don't blame me for not showing mercy. How do you know she is my mother? That goddess of Penglai could not escape, nor could she beat him. She took 3 steps back and widened her eyes. That woman carries a painting with her. He takes it out every day to look at it. He cries while looking at it. She mutters that it's her son. Isn't he exactly the same as you? Li Yunxin was stunned and sat on the chair. In Lu Baishui's eyes, Li Yunxin had always been calm. Even when he found out that the so-called god Li Si was a zombie and possessed by a demon, he did not panic. But at this time he saw him in a daze. All kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. He realized that Brother Li was also a sentimental person. Although he was free and easy, he did not forget the righteousness and filial piety. It was really admirable. Therefore he shouted for him, Tell us in detail. Tell us everything and we won't make things difficult for you. He did not know what the demon was thinking at this time. Maybe it knew it could not do anything and was afraid. Or it had other thoughts. In the end, it rolled its eyes and said in a shrill voice, What does it have to do with me? I was sitting in the temple when the boat suddenly crashed into me. That woman was unreasonable. She almost destroyed my temple and said I was making trouble. It was all because of the rebellious wind. The trouble. He stayed on my spirit mountain for a few days again. Asking questions here and there, asking questions here and there. Just like you now. On this Empress's immortal mountain. At this time, Li Yunxin came back to his senses. Listening to the demon's 3 sentences, he noticed some details. The woman mentioned by goddess of Penglai should be Shangguanyu. She also said a few days, and asked all kinds of questions with resentment. It could be seen that Shangguanyu's body was fine at that time and she could even control goddess of Penglai. He was a little relieved in his heart. He heaved a sigh of relief, but it was as if he had opened up a bag in his body. Suddenly, a lot of different feelings gushed out. This feeling seemed to have been fermented for many years, making him feel a little sour in his heart. After all, it was a strange and fearful feeling. So he frowned and didn't think about it for the time being. Go on. We didn't come to you for revenge. Although the temperament of demons was hard to understand, their thoughts were not complicated. Listening to Goddess of Penglai say so much, how could he not know that she hated that rebellious to the bone? So he pushed the boat with the current. If you didn't do anything bad, and my mother's boat was really capsized by that rebellious guy as you said, we still have to help you get justice. It seemed that he was right on Goddess of Penglai's mind. She widened her eyes and shouted, "Are you serious? Hehe, let me tell you what good things that rebellious guy did. When your mother came to my spirit mountain, she asked all kinds of questions. She said she wanted to go to the Dragon Island. He lost her mind. It was spring, how could she go to the Dragon Island? I drifted on the sea for more than 10 years. I didn't even see the Dragon Island. Humph. Later she didn't believe me and insisted on asking that rebellious guy. That rebellious guy hadn't seen anyone for many years. Of course he liked to eat people. He caught all the living ones and ate them. Her mother. Oh, she fought with him. Li Yunxin leaned forward slightly. Then, Goddess of Penglai blinked. Then, I attached myself to the body of this dead guy and ran away. Li Yunxin and Lu Baishui looked at each other and then at her. Why did you run away? Goddess of Penglai glared at him. Because I asked her to fight with that rebellious guy. Li Yunxin was silent for a while and asked her, what is this rebellious guy you always talk about? This time it was the demon's turn to be silent. After a long silence, just when Li Yunxin thought she had used some unknown method to escape, she opened her mouth, her voice full of obvious viciousness and hatred. That rebellious guy? It's that damn Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. Li Yunxin frowned. Dragon King? Chapter 592. But at the moment the demon seemed to have fallen into a deep hatred and anger. It just stood there, gnashing its teeth and murmuring something. Lu Baishui leaned towards him and said, Brother Li, you just arrived in the East Sea country, so it's normal that you don't know about this. The legend of the East Sea Dragon King has been around for a long time. It's said that although Shinryu is a spirit creature saint, they still need to be managed on the sea. Therefore they infect a few dragon son as Dragon King. The East Sea Dragon King is the 9th son. Li Yunxin thought for a while, then asked, Brother Lu, according to what you said, the legend of the East Sea country is interesting. There are some legends in the Central Plains too. Brother Lu, you're a knowledgeable man, you should have heard about them. They say that Shinryu did infect 9 sons. But the one that controls 70% of the water in the world. Lu Baishui smilingly shook his head. He seemed to be in a good mood, knowing that Li Yunxin's mother was still alive. He said in a low voice, Brother Li, you're talking about the Dragon King of the land. The ones in the coastal area are the Dragon King of the sea. The Midland is vast. It's normal that there are different legends. We often have visitors from the inland. In fact, there are also legends about the Dragon King of the land. But according to the legends in the coastal area, the Dragon King of the land only controls a small amount of water, so it doesn't belong to Shinryu. It's the inferior dragon son. The real Dragon King and Dragon Son are the ones in the sea. Speaking of this, he shook his head and waved his hand. To be honest, I believe in demons, ghosts, and immortals. But these Dragon King and Dragon Son, I don't believe in them. I think they're all made up. The East Sea Dragon King she mentioned. Maybe it's a monster's name. He paused for a second, his eyes sparkling in the dim light. Then he hesitated and lowered his voice. But Brother Li, your mother and you, who are you? He had thought that Li Yunxin was a gentle and courteous hero. Perhaps he was the kind of young master who was born in a wealthy official's family and didn't have to worry about food and drink, so he hired a brilliant teacher to teach him. Only when he left the mountain and roamed the Jianghu would he have such an appearance. But later she heard from him that his family was in trouble and his parents were separated. His mother had cultivated in the Taoist scriptures, but her whereabouts were unknown. Thus he felt that she might be from a noble family of the pugilistic world. He had roamed the Jianghu for many years, and was once an outstanding disciple of an elder of the western region's flame cult. He had also made acquaintance with some Jianghu's first and second-rate experts, such as Golden Blade Zhang Daxia, Black Blading Daxia, piercing cloud thunderbolt han du xinyang, cage yenalu kong kong and so on. But now he was thinking hard about which aristocratic family had done such a thing, but he just couldn't figure it out. The person in front of him, Li Yunxin, was definitely not a nobody in Jianghu. But he just didn't know. So, what kind of person was he? At this moment he heard this demon mention the East Sea Dragon King. The demon in front of him was real. The so-called East Sea Dragon King she mentioned, even if it was another demon in disguise, should be a character that normal people would find difficult to deal with. But this brother Li's mother could actually fight evenly with the East Sea Dragon King. At this moment, Lu Baishui didn't dare to think too deeply about Li Yunxin's background. Hearing this, Li Yunxin thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "I was born in the Qing Kingdom, and I am a citizen of the Qing Kingdom." He thought for a moment and said, "I have never been a bandit, nor have I taken bribes, nor am I a heretic." Lu Baishui quietly said, "Oh," and didn't ask any more. He was a Jianghu person, so he naturally understood human feelings. He knew that Brother Li had answered him like this because there was something he couldn't say. But in the end he still told himself that he was not a bad person, so there was no need to worry. It wasn't the first time he had encountered this kind of situation, so it was understandable. But there was still a lingering curiosity in his heart. It was as if he had returned to his youth when he first entered the Jianghu. Facing the mysterious treasure cave on the cliff, curiosity and excitement rose. Even though he knew that going forward could lead to unpredictable dangers, he also knew that there could be new discoveries. This kind of feeling had not appeared in a long time as his martial arts improved and his wealth increased. Now he experienced it again. After Li Yunxin said these words, he turned his head to look at the demon again and asked in a low voice, "Let me ask you, what does the East Sea Dragon King look like?" At this time the demon rolled her eyes again. It seemed that she had vented some of her anger by being alone just now. At this time she came back to her senses and said, "Oh, what do you want to know? Huh? Are you really going to find that woman?" Oh, I'm not telling you." She seemed to have thought of a wonderful idea and almost jumped up from the ground in joy. "I'm not telling you. Go find her yourself." Go find her. Take me with you." "I'll tell you when we get there. Help me kill that traitor." This demon sure is a bit of a smart one. Although she looked similar to Mrs. Sanhua, as if she was delirious because of the damage to her soul or something else, she still retained some consciousness and thought patterns left behind in her mind. Therefore it became like this. Look at Li Yunxin's extraordinary moves. She wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and asked him to go out to the sea to kill that traitor. But a really smart person wouldn't have said that. She had said it in a daze. But it was exactly what Li Yunxin wanted. He originally wanted to find a way to sneak into the vicinity of the Dragon Island and find out the situation. But now he knew that there were some spirit mountains, and that the 9-dragon sun was on the spirit mountains. It seemed that the vast sea was not as cold as it looked. There was another world in a complicated pattern. He was not afraid of the complicated pattern, but he was afraid of the word clueless. This goddess Penglai was so narrow-minded. He didn't care what she wanted to lead him to do. As long as he could get some information and hide his tracks, he would do it even if she didn't ask him. Not to mention, Zheng Guanyu was here. He wanted to figure out some things and some feelings. No matter what, he wanted a definite and definite result. There was enough fog. This was the last thing he wanted. Just then, a loud noise was heard from outside the house. Then the sound of gravel hitting the door made the lintel tremble, and a large amount of dust fell from the beam. Lu Baishui's face changed and he stood up suddenly. But Li Yunxin just frowned and then relaxed. An acquaintance. He stood up and looked at Goddess Penglai. "So, you want me to take you to your Penglai spirit mountain?" The demon rolled her eyes and nodded. Li Yunxin smiled faintly. "Oh, I'll take you there in a few days." "Well, why don't I take you now?" After saying this, before Lu Baishui and the demon could figure out what he meant, he suddenly reached out and took out a talisman from his sleeve. He turned his finger again and the talisman shot out like lightning, sticking to Li Si's forehead. The zombie froze completely. It swayed on the spot and fell to the ground with a thud. But the talisman floated up and returned to Li Yunxin's palm like a bird. What a beautiful move. Lu Baishui couldn't help cheering, and then he realized it was a Taoist magic art. As expected, this brother Li of his wasn't a simple martial artist. Li Yunxin folded the talisman into a small triangle and put it away. He looked at Lu Baishui, seeming to be in a dilemma. Brother Lu. There are some people outside, they are my acquaintances. Lu Baishui's face darkened. Enemies? Li Yunxin shook his head with a wry smile. Enemies. He is my distant cousin. He insisted on coming out with me as I said before. So he found a capable follower to follow him. Now he should be coming for me. In a while, Brother Lu, I hope you'll forgive me for my sake. Li Yunxin rarely spoke in such a tone. Lu Baishui was slightly surprised. Then he realized that Li Si might be an arrogant young master. He came from a mysterious family living in seclusion in the mountains, so he was arrogant. He had seen many people like this, so he didn't care. Besides, he was more and more curious about Li Yunxin's background, and he was willing to take this opportunity to find some clues from his distant cousin. So he smiled. I've seen so many miraculous things today, so there's nothing to hide. Brother Li, please. After saying this, he didn't look at Li Si's zombie on the ground. Instead, he exerted his palm force and blasted open the door through the air. A gust of cold wind rushed into the courtyard, and the two of them saw the scene in the courtyard. Li Si's yard was surrounded by a low wall. And the low wall was built with stones and smeared with yellow mud. Looking at it now, there was a big hole in the wall on the east side of the yard, and the rest of the wall had fallen. The stone that struck the door just now should have been sent flying by the impact. In the yard, there were two people. One was a young man in white. In Lu Baishui's eyes, he was even more handsome than Brother Li. If Li Yunxin's appearance was the best in the world, then this young man must have the appearance of a celestial being. He must be Brother Li's distant cousin. And this cousin was grabbing the follower in his hand. The follower's clothes were a bit exotic. He wore a green robe decorated with colorful embroidery. It looked like the feathers of a big rooster were pulled off and woven into his clothes. He didn't look very pretty. He had a sharp mouth but not monkey-like cheeks. But his eyes were bright and full of expression. Looking at the two, it seemed that this cousin was grabbing the follower's collar and was about to hit him. But Lu Baishui knew at a glance that it was not a play of a villain bullying a servant. Because the follower also looked like he was about to fight back. When he took a closer look, he gasped in astonishment. This Brother Li by his side was unfathomable, and looking at his follower, he was actually a top-notch expert. In this shock, Li Yunxin had already stepped out of the door and sighed. What are you doing? The ninth young master looked at Li Yunxin and then at Pheasant. He angrily let go of Xianxia and pushed him away, pointing at him. You better remember this. You lost this time. I'm better than you in martial arts. Pheasant said, I let you take a step back. Otherwise I would have hit the house. Next time we compete, your palm technique is not as good as mine. After saying this, he winked at Li Yunxin. So he knew that Pheasant did a good job this time. Before he and the ninth young master set off, Li Yunxin told them something. For example, he told the ninth young master, now that the world is in turmoil and your state is not stable, you'd better keep a low profile and pretend to be an ordinary person. You can go sightseeing along the way. How wonderful it is. If he had said this to the ninth young master, he might have thought it was bullsh*t. But now it was different. He had died once and was almost swallowed once, so he finally knew how to be afraid of death. And he knew that although Li Yunxin seemed to be smiling, his means were more vicious than anyone he knew. It left a shadow in his heart. Besides, he didn't hate the prosperity of the human world, so he agreed casually. He also agreed to call himself Li Yunxin's cousin out of respect. In fact, in the eyes of Dragon's Son, the latter was like asking a child to play a doctor or a soldier. He was happy and interested. He wrote a few stories for Pheasant. He asked Pheasant to tell the ninth young master the steps of the stories he wrote along the way. The protagonists of the stories he wrote were mostly heroes in Jianghu. When the two of them walked along the road, Pheasant would listen to Li Yunxin's instructions and tell stories to the ninth young master every time they came across a place with magnificent scenery. No wonder they were stories of great heroes, getting to know each other without fighting, and of gratitude and hatred with a smile. In Li Yunxin's eyes, it might be tacky and old-fashioned, but in the eyes of others, it was sincere and interesting. He asked the ninth young master to listen to this road because he wanted to be a little more secure. Who in the world was better than a young man who had just gained a new life and was full of expectations for the world? So far, the ninth young master didn't make any big trouble along the way. And he got along well with Pheasant. Li Yunxin nodded slightly to him. Then he looked into the distance. Where's Miss Bai? Pheasant tidied up his robe and said respectfully, Young master, I met Miss Bai on the way. On the way he met Miss Bai. After walking together for 2 days, they suddenly parted ways in a hurry. She said something big happened at home and had to go back to take care of it. She didn't say anything else. Miss Bai referred to Bai Yunxin. This Bai Yunxin was originally asked by the evil lord to walk with him. But, something big happened at home? Li Yunxin had a vague idea. But he didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse. At this time Lu Baishui also walked out. He cupped his hands to the 9th young master and said with a smile, "Young hero, you are good at martial arts. How should I address you?" Hearing this, the 9th young master tilted his head slightly and looked at him. But he didn't say anything, he just looked curious. Ever since he became famous, Lu Baishui had never encountered such a situation. He greeted someone first but someone didn't listen to him. So after 2 breaths he slowly put down his hands and his face gradually turned cold. Suddenly the 9th young master said, "Aren't you cold?" Lu Baishui was stunned. Then he looked at Li Yunxin's cousin carefully and finally found some clues. This person seemed to be a little childish. In the martial arts world, it was a decent way to describe a person as mentally retarded. But according to Lu Baishui's experience, this person belonged to the kind of people who were extremely talented in martial arts but behaved like a child. Thus he felt relieved in his heart, but at the same time he felt a little ashamed of his anger just now. Before he left, this brotherly had reminded him. Since that was the case, his unhappiness turned into love. He smiled and said, "I'm used to walking in the snow. It's not cold." The 9th young master stared at him for a while. It was only when Li Yunxin coughed softly that she laughed, revealing 2 rows of snow-white teeth. "This person is interesting." After saying this he walked 2 steps forward, still staring at Lu Baishui. His bright red tongue flashed by his lips and disappeared. "He is much more interesting than the others on the road." Hearing this, Lu Baishui laughed. "Brother Li, your cousin is also an interesting person." But Li Yunxin also laughed. He looked at the 9th young master and coughed again. He said in a low voice, "Cousin, this is my friend." Chapter 593. Lu Baishui could hear his tone. There was a hint of seriousness in his solemn tone. Therefore he thought that perhaps this brother Li saw that his distant cousin did not have much respect for him, and that his attitude was also rude, so he solemnly reminded him. He hurriedly said, "Hey brother Li. Your younger brother has the heart of a newborn baby, innocent and unaffected. That's something we can't learn. I like his enthusiasm. A young man should be like this." Then he looked at the 9th young master. "What's your name?" When he said this he really talked to a young man. The 9th young master stared at Lu Baishui for a while and then muttered, "Friend. Friend." He turned to look at Li Yunxin angrily. "Interesting people are your friends. You have so many friends." After saying this he stomped away in a fit of pique. Lu Baishui was baffled by his sudden temper. But Pheasant and Li Yunxin were relieved at the same time. Master Lu, the hero of Stormy Wave's path of Donghai country, didn't know that his life was walking on a tightrope just now. Li Yunxin sighed. "Brother Lu, my younger brother is rude and I don't discipline him well." Lu Baishui laughed and waved his hand. I know. An elder brother is like a father. You should have a headache. But your cousin is an outstanding talent and he also has a hard time. It doesn't matter." When he said this, he saw Pheasant was a little anxious beside Li Yunxin. He was clear. He knew that this attendant should have something to say to Li Yunxin. So he laughed knowingly. "Okay. You haven't seen each other for a long time, so I won't disturb you. I'll go back and prepare some food for you. Brother Li, see you later." Li Yunxin smiled. "Thank you, Brother Lu." Lu Baishui stretched his limbs and jumped onto the roof, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Li Yunxin turned to look at Pheasant. "What's wrong?" The chicken spirit said in a low voice. "Great king. Ah, young master, we met a strange person on the way. I thought I should tell young master about this." Thinking about what Lu Baishui and Goddess Penglai said about the Dragon King of the East Sea and the Dragon Son of the Sea, Li Yunxin answered, "Yes. Speak." "That's right. 3 days ago a strange person came to us. I don't know what kind of strange person he is. But the way he spoke and acted was strange. When you see him, ask if he's Wei River Dragon King." Pheasant said while looking at Li Yunxin's face. The 9th young master. Although he didn't cause any trouble along the way, it wasn't very peaceful. "I didn't watch them. I ate a few people. I was thinking that perhaps because of this my identity was exposed. Then I said, the ninth young master overheard him. The demon walked over and pushed the pheasant aside. Go go go. I don't need you to tell me what to do. He was quite proud when he said this. He seemed to be satisfied with what he had done 3 days ago. Then he said to Li Yunxin, Humph, I'll say it myself. That person haha is also interesting. His name is Xianxia. Li Yunxin's ears suddenly stood up and he came to his senses. Xianxia? What does he look like? The ninth young master said indifferently, humans all look the same. They are ugly with 2 eyes and 1 mouth. How many beautiful ones are there? Li Yunxin looked at Pheasant. Is he shorter than me, dark face, thin eyebrows? Speaking of this, he found that Pheasant seemed to be confused. Then he remembered that many demons indeed couldn't see much difference when they looked at people. It's like people looking at cats, monkeys, cows and sheep. If there was no difference in fur color, they looked the same at first glance. So he put his fingers together and sketched a figure in the air. Is it this person? The ninth young master glanced at it. Think so. Pheasant nodded. Young master, it's this person. Li Yunxin replied with a, Ninth young master, please tell me in detail. This Xianxia they met was the real prince who had run away from Li Chunfeng. He thought this guy would come to him, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Hearing his tone, the ninth young master knew that this matter must be important to Li Yunxin. But then he raised his eyebrows and stared at him. Is he your friend again? Li Yunxin shook his head. Oh, he's not a friend. The demon said with an oh. That's easy. He's an idiot. According to the ninth young master, it didn't happen 3 days ago. In fact, it should be 7 days ago. 7 days ago they passed by a small village near Sima town. The village was small with only a dozen families. It was here that the ninth young master, the demon, became greedy. When Pheasant wasn't paying attention, he killed and ate a man. In public, in front of dozens of people in the village. Pheasant used Li Yunxin to pressure him. But the ninth young master wasn't a vegetarian. With blood in his mouth, he stubbornly said, What's the big deal about eating meat? I'm the son of Wei River Dragon King Xinryu, and Xinryu came to praise me at the foot of Yunshan. Maybe because he had been the Wei River Dragon King for 1,000 years, he said this name smoothly. Since he said it, he wouldn't change it. What could Pheasant do to him? He could only try his best to coax him away before he became violent and killed more people. As for the people in the village, he didn't kill them. Because nowadays, it wasn't news for demons to eat people. Even if it was spread out, few people would believe it. Because it was possible for demons to eat humans. But if one counted carefully, for example, if there were 10 cases of demons eating people in the city of Wei in a year, at least 9 of them were false. It wasn't demons who ate people, but people who killed people and then lied about being demons eating people. It was an absurd excuse. If the government couldn't solve the case, they could use it as an excuse to announce that it was indeed demons eating people. But people weren't all fools. As time went by, he gradually stopped believing in the government and also stopped believing in the existence of demons. Now, when someone said that people were eaten, the first thing they thought of was that the government couldn't solve the murder case and was perfunctory. In addition, there were many beasts in the mountains in this era. It was not uncommon for beasts to attack people in villages and towns. Some people said that people who were killed by beasts were eaten by demons. Pheasant thought that if the 2 of them left, no one would believe it even if dozens of people told others about it. Who would care about a cheap life in the mountains and villages? Unexpectedly, among the dozens of villagers that day there was a foreigner, Xianxia. Hearing this, Li Yunxin frowned. He thought, how could it be so coincidental? But after thinking about it, he couldn't think of any other explanation except coincidence. But on the other hand, it wasn't strange for a real prince with a protagonist's destiny to encounter such a coincidence. After all, he could find a secret book of martial arts even if he fell off a cliff. Xianxia had taken ninth young master's words to heart. Then he followed him for 4 days and observed secretly. When he first entered the world, he thought he had made rapid progress in cultivation and had great magical power. But he didn't know how clever the demons in the world were compared to him. No matter how well he hid his tracks, how could the ninth young master not find out? Fortunately, the demon had already satisfied his appetite. It was rare to find a person dared to follow him, so he had fun. Along the way, he deliberately talked about the things between him and Xinryu and many details of his life in the Wei River, No one knew who he was showing off to. But Xianxia must have seen and heard it. Combined with what he had seen and heard on the way, he seemed to realize that this was indeed the Wei River Dragon King, who had existed for 1,000 years. So 4 days later, 3 days ago, Xianxia found the 9th young master. He suddenly came in through the window. When he landed, he asked me, "Are you the Wei River Dragon King?" The 9th young master stared at Xianxia and imitated him. He couldn't tell the Qin people apart, but he imitated them very well. From this, Li Yunxin could imagine Xianxia's expression at that time. It was a cautious but firm expression. Maybe there were some other meanings. For example, some kind of heroic spirit caused by courage. I asked him, "Who are you?" The 9th young master took a step back and distinguished the two people he described as if he was enjoying it. He just said a lot of nonsense. Things like guiding people, protecting little demons' plans, and so on. I felt dizzy. Hey, I thought he was annoying, so I waved my hand and sent him out. Li Yunxin slightly frowned and glanced at Pheasant. Pheasant immediately said, "Then I followed him." The 9th young master was surprised. "What? Why didn't I know?" Pheasant muttered a few words to fool him and said to Li Yunxin, "That person fought with me for a while and it was a draw. But I pretended to lose to him. Why did you follow him?" Li Yunxin suddenly asked. He looked a little curious. Pheasant said, "I saw him following me for so long and he was interested in the name of the king, so I paid attention to him." "Well, go on." "I didn't think he would kill me. Sure enough, he just asked me some things. I thought about it and felt that everything he asked had other intentions. But I was not as smart as the king, so I couldn't figure it out." Pheasant sighed, but I could see that no matter what I said, he didn't believe me. At this time, Li Yunxin was more sure that it was the Xianxia he met. Xianxia was smart, but he didn't know much. He didn't trust people easily and he had strong confidence in himself. When he talked with Li Yunxin in the mountain, he was sure that the organization he was looking for was the Little Demon Protector. Now he met him by chance and followed him all the way, probably to confirm his conjecture. Fortunately, the 9th young master, who used to be the real Wei River Dragon King but was now a fake, helped Li Yunxin unintentionally. The Wei River Dragon King he met on the way must be different from what he imagined. If it was an ordinary person, he might think it's not. But smart people like him and Li Yunxin always took a roundabout way. For example, was it a deliberate act? Otherwise, how could the Wei River Dragon King, who made the Little Demon Protector, drive him out without hesitation after hearing the word guide? So I followed his words and wanted to know what he wanted to ask. "I wanted to know what he was going to ask," said the Pheasant slowly. "But the man was too clever. I couldn't see the flaw. Except for the king, I have never seen such a smart person." Speaking of this, Li Yunxin asked another irrelevant question. "Your real body is a rooster. What about before you transformed into a human?" He had seen a lot of demons in his life. But even some great demon kings in the real state might not be as smart as Pheasant. While it was true that he, the king, had taught them well, there should be other factors as well. Pheasant was a little stunned and said, "Before I transformed into a human, I was a timekeeper in the mountain watching school of the Lu family in the city of Wei for many years." Li Yunxin smiled. "No wonder. Go on." Pheasant blinked. Finally he asked where we were going. I said we were going to the Dragon Island. Then that person left. Maybe he realized he was exposed, so he didn't follow us all the way. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and thought for a while. He looked up and asked, "So where do you think he would go after he left?" Pheasant was stunned again and a trace of fear finally appeared on his face. He didn't follow Li Yunxin for a long time, but it wasn't short either. So he often saw his king and Lu Gongzan discussing some things. Occasionally his king would ask Lao Dao's opinion. But as for the demon generals under his command, he didn't give them any face, but mostly ordered them around. He didn't have any opinion on this. Compared to other demons who killed their demon soldiers and demon generals, and even compared to the strict teachers in the mountain watching school, Li Yunxin actually treated them very well. But now that they had parted ways and met Li Yunxin again, he found that he had changed slightly. He couldn't tell what had changed, and even his words were still as simple as before. But Pheasant felt that he was finally included in the king's sight, instead of being an emotionless puppet in the background. Now he even asked himself what he thought would be. He was frightened by this sudden attention. It took him 2 breaths to calm down, and then he hurriedly said, I think, He will also want to go to the Dragon Island to see what's going on. Maybe Li Yunxin didn't notice the demon general's emotion. Maybe he noticed it but he didn't show it. He thought for a while and then said, I think so too. If he really did that, I guess I'll have a rough understanding of this person's temper. His affirmation made Pheasant blink his eyes quickly and straightened his body. At this time the 9th young master had already entered the room and looked through everything in the room. Except for the zombie on the ground, he was not interested in anything else. So he turned around. Cousin Li. It's so boring here, when are you going to stop talking? Li Yunxin turned to look at him and smiled. 9th young master, just bear with it for a few days. After a few days, when we are ready, it is said that there are still Dragon King and Dragon Son in the East Sea. They even said that we are inferior, don't they? 9th young master, do you want to go and have a look? The 9th young master immediately opened his eyes wide and raised his eyebrows. What? Who dares to say such a thing? But halfway through his anger he stopped. What kind of things are they? Li Yunxin laughed again. They should be some stupid demons that don't make the cut. They have never seen the world in the barbarian land, that's why they say so. The 9th young master regained his anger. Hey! Then let's go to the sea and teach them a lesson. I'll wait. You better get ready quickly. Chapter 594. It took him 5 days to prepare. For the 9th young master of the Lord Tongtian, these 5 days were really hard to bear. He used to be weak, so he could only hide in a section of Weishui River near Dongting. The Lord of Dongting was powerful and resourceful, so he didn't dare to make trouble around the Lord Dongting. But he didn't have a good life around him either. Evil King of the Pitfall Mountain was also in the mysterious realm. Bai Yunxin, who was in the realm of truth, always came to scare him. People always joked with each other because they knew that rational people wouldn't suddenly kill people. But for the fiendish demons, who knew if they would really become fierce when they were still smiling in the past? He was scared by the monster Bai Yunxin again. It was okay if he was a lowly wild monster, but he was Dragon Son. To be fair, no human or monster in the world was more wrong than him. Then he experienced many things and in the end, bitterness is over. Li Yunxin created such a body at the peak of the realm of truth with the help of painting Taoism and something else. With this body he didn't have to live like before. 1,000 years of grievances were gone now. How was it compared with the disaster of being killed? In fact, this was also one of the reasons why the fiendish demon had quickly forgotten about Li Yunxin. As the saying goes, a smile dissolves all enmity. Otherwise, why would the 9th young master say to Li Yunxin when he met him outside the burning city of Wei, "Don't disgrace the name of the Lord of Weishui River"? Because of this, the 9th young master was like a duck out of its nest. Shinryu came to support him, and with the terrible Li Yunxin no one dared to provoke him. Those who hadn't played before wanted to have fun, and those who hadn't eaten before wanted to eat to their heart's content. The prosperous world was vast and everyone wanted to see it. But now staying by Li Yunxin's side in the East Xian was really painful. He couldn't do anything and Li Yunxin didn't allow him to eat people. It was like returning to a cage. Therefore he looked forward to it day and night, wanting nothing more than to go to sea as soon as possible. But it all depended on Lu Baishui. This stormy wave road tycoon had quite a few businesses under his name, but he had never been involved in the fishing industry before. Although he had plans to go overseas to explore, it was already winter. He had planned to wait until spring to prepare for this matter. Who would have thought that they would run into Li Yunxin? And so they made their move at this time. There were many boats in Whitewater Town, but they were all small and medium-sized. They could walk in the coastal waters, but they couldn't withstand the winds and waves of the ocean. But Lu Baishui had a wide circle of friends, so he got lucky. In the past his relationship with the local government was not bad, but it was not harmonious either. Over the past year, because of some business matters, he had become acquainted with the Supreme Judge Xie Sun of the Stormy Waves Road, and could be considered to have some friends in the government. As a result, he managed to obtain 2 3-masted 3-fang warships. 3 masts referred to the 3 main masts, and 3 fangs referred to the 3 floors of the ship. It was nearly 100 meters long and required nearly 200 sailors to accompany it. This kind of thing would not be easily obtained by the common people. Even if one had a mountain of gold and silver, it would be difficult to buy it. But these 2 warships were not obtained by the proper way. In the area of Aquarius Bay in the East Sea, there had always been a pirate fleet, which was quite powerful. The pirate leader's surname was Lu Fei, and he called himself the Sea King. It was said that he used to be a rich and powerful family in the Central Plains, but because of an accident in his family, he escaped to the sea and gathered a group of pirates. This group of pirates was not ordinary. There were 5 or 6 such 3-masted three-fong warships and dozens of small boats. The bow of the ship was equipped with an angle of attack, and when they encountered a merchant ship, they would rush over and then board the ship. It was extremely fierce. The East Sea Navy had sent troops to encircle and annihilate them 3 times, but they lost 2 times and won 1 time. They had never found the main force of the pirates. But in this spring there was an unforeseen event. Somehow there was an internal strife among the pirates. One of the leaders brought these 2 warships and more than 300 people to surrender to the government. He said that he could also offer the sea map of Aquarius Bay so that the government could capture the Sea King Lu Fei. The government temporarily detained these 2 warships, and the leaders who would surrender to the government also treated them well. But for some unknown reason these leaders were suddenly beheaded. More than 300 pirates were also hanged. It was said that they did not come to surrender. Instead they planned to pretend to surrender and then cooperate with the Sea King Lu Fei to capture the Stormy Waves Road. This matter had been going on for quite some time. It gradually calmed down at the end of autumn. But the warships of the East Sea Navy were 5-fong big wings, and the shape was different from the ships of the pirates, so they did not want to accept them. The coastal people who could afford these 2 warships were not willing to be involved in bad luck. It must be known that Lu Fei was extremely arrogant. Some ignorant people bought his ships to run shipping on the sea. What would happen if they were seen? Thus it became a hot potato. Everyone wanted it but no one dared to. Until Lu Baishui thought of this, he spent 16,000 taels of silver to buy these 2 ships. 16,000 taels of silver. If it was multiplied 10 times, it would be the tax of the Stormy Waves Road for a year. He also spent a lot of money to recruit many sailors and desperados. Within a short span of 5 days he had spent 20,000 taels of silver. Everyone said that Lord Lu had lost his mind. He bought Sea King Lu Fei's ship, chose to go to sea in winter, and was said to be looking for the Dragon Island. He probably would not be able to return alive. And so, 5 days later, the Danfeng harbor, which was 10 miles away from Whitewater Town, was bustling. 2 huge ships were anchored on the sea 1 kilometer away like 2 hills. Dozens of small boats were going back and forth between the huge ships in the harbor, transporting all kinds of materials. The draft of these 2 ships was too deep, and the Danfeng harbor near Whitewater Town could not accommodate them. There were mountains of food and other goods in the harbor, and sailors who came from all directions. There were also some people who came to sell goods, snacks and prostitutes. Lu Baishui sat in the hall on the 3rd floor of a restaurant near the harbor, looking out and having a panoramic view of the situation on the harbor. It was still early in the morning and the recruited sailors had already been busy all night. They would be able to set sail by ship around noon. But they came here because they wanted to see someone. About midnight last night, someone suddenly came to find Lu Baishui. He said that there was a new sea ban. No ships were allowed to go to sea until the beginning of spring, no exceptions. In the morning, Xie Sun, the prefect of the governor's office, would come to explain this matter. Lu Baishui sent someone to entertain them and send them off. Then they waited for Prefect Xie in the only restaurant on the harbor. At this moment, Prefect Xie was in front of them. It happened so suddenly. I don't know why you thought of this. Prefect Xie was about 30 years old, young and promising. He had a long beard, a white face and narrow eyes. He looked like a gentleman. His tone and tone were also very easygoing. I can't persuade you. The 2 ships were sold to you for 16,000 taels of silver, and you already suspect that I am profiting from it. So I came here to discuss with you. Lu Baishui frowned and looked out of the window. Brother Xia, look at the situation outside. The people and the goods are all here. Now you suddenly say that I can't leave. I am in a difficult position. Is there any way to make an exception? Of course there was a way. Lu Baishui had been in Jianghu for many years, how could he not know? Before last night she had thought that Xie Sun was a good friend who got along well with each other. Only now did she realize that he was actually the same as those people. He came here at this time and said that he couldn't leave. Then, there is a way. Alas, it depends on whether Brother Lu is willing. Prefect Xie sighed. It looked like it was difficult. Lu Baishui laughed coldly in his heart. But he didn't show it on his face. As long as there is a way. Brother Xia, I have almost 1,000 taels of silver here. If there is a way. Brother Xia, you can take it and help me get things done. If it is not enough, just call someone to the East Xian. Prefect Xia frowned. What are you talking about? His face was a bit ugly. If Brother Lu thinks I am here to talk about this. I am leaving now. Xia Baishui was stunned. But he hurriedly said, it is a misunderstanding. Brother Xia, I misunderstood. Then what is it? Xia Sun angrily stared at Lu Baishui for a while, then sighed and waved his hand. Forget it. The way I am talking about is that you take a person with you. I don't know where this person is from. He looks like a Taoist priest. A few days ago there was some evil in the governor's office and this person came to clean it up. Then he won the governor's favor. He also told the governor that there was a celestial medicine in the mountains overseas, and that he could get it for the governor. Last we talked about this in private. Prefect Xie snorted then sighed. The governor said he wanted to ban the sea. He also wanted to find a fleet to send this Taoist priest to meet the immortals overseas. He liked these 2 ships. But I didn't know. Alas. So now there is only one way. You take him with you. Nominally, these 2 ships are under his control and he can use them so he can ignore the sea ban. Lu Baishui was silent for a while and his face was a bit ugly. When Prefect Xie said they couldn't go to sea, his face was normal. Now that there was a way to solve the problem, he looked like this. It was strange. But Prefect Xie didn't seem to care about his expression. He just waited for him to take a sip of tea. Finally, Lu Baishui raised his head and smiled. Okay. Brother Xie, can I see the Taoist priest first? Prefect Xie clapped his hands and smiled. Of course you can. Brother Lu really knows the big picture. Taoist priest Xie, please come out. So the person was already here. In fact, this was also within Lu Baishui's expectation. The 2 ships were priced at 16,000 taels of silver. It was indeed a good deal. If he hired someone to build them, not only would it take a long time, but the manpower and materials needed would be more than 100,000 taels of silver. Before today he thought this Prefect Xie was trying to make friends with him. But now he realized he was being slaughtered like a fat sheep. Lu Baishui also had this day. He paid for the purchase of the ship, for the recruitment of the seamen, for the preparation of the stores. Then the sea ban was issued and the Taoist priest Xie and a group of soldiers were sent. His 2 ships became the government's. These government officials. They were even more ruthless than demons when it came to eating people. This was the first time he suffered like this. Chapter 595. If it was a few years ago he would have cut off this dog official's head. But now he was more knowledgeable and knew that a moment of anger could not solve the problem. Could even make the problem worse. So he endured it. At this time Xie Daozhong, whom Xie Sun had mentioned, walked in. Lu Baishui was stunned when he saw him. Xie Sun said that this Xie Daozhong was killing demons in the governor's office and persuaded the commander-in-chief of the Stormy Wave Road to go to the sea to find the Spirit Mountain. He thought he should be a respectable Lao Dao. Unexpectedly, the person in front of him was a young man. He was not very tall but not too short either. His skin was a little dark as if he often worked in the mountains. The rest were thin eyebrows, eyes, nose and mouth. He did not look beautiful or ugly. There was nothing special about him. He was wearing a green Taoist robe and his face was calm. Was this the person? Seeing his surprise, Xie Sun smiled. Brother Lu, don't underestimate Xie Daozhong. He is very powerful. With Xie Daozhong you will be safe on the sea. You don't have to worry about demons or sea monsters. Ah. He laughed and then stood up. Oi. I have told you everything. Go with Xie Daozhong and 100 soldiers of the commander-in-chief. Listen to Xie Daozhong's command and go to the sea together. Taoist, I will leave now. He bowed to Xie Daozhong. The young Xie Daozhong returned the salute with a serious expression. Xie Daozhong didn't look at Lu Baishui again and went downstairs. Master Lu looked at the young Taoist in front of him and sighed. Xie Daozhong, come with me. The commander-in-chief of the East Sea Road left Xie Daozhong with 100 soldiers under the command of a brigade commander. Nominally, they were escorting Xie Daozhong to find the Spirit Mountain, but in fact they were taking over the 2 ships by force. Lu Baishui's 2 ships recruited nearly 400 sailors. Those who could go to the sea at this time were all outlaws and had some skills. Once they fought with these soldiers on the sea they might not be able to win. But now he was a hero of the Stormy Wave Road. He was no longer a carefree teenager. Many people depended on him to survive and make a living. No matter how much hatred he felt, he couldn't really cause trouble on the sea. He could only obediently hand over the 2 giant ships. Both the imperial official Xia and the governor knew that he could not do anything about it. Thereupon he boarded the boat on which he, Li Yunxin, and the others were on the buy-in. He left Xie Daozhong and the rest of the officers and soldiers behind, and told the others to entertain them, while he himself went straight to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor of the ship was windy and unstable. It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer. It was not a good place to be. But Lu Baishui was not afraid of the cold, and Li Yunxin didn't seem to be afraid of the cold either. Lu Baishui, Li Yunxin, and his cousin the 9th young master were divided into 3 rooms on the upper floor. The remaining sailors and seamen of a higher class lived on the 1st and 2nd floors as was customary. The rest lived in the lower cabins. Each ship had about 200 people and 2 captains. One of them was Lu Baishui's former right-hand man, and the other was a trusted old friend. They also brought some of their friends and relatives, established rules and regulations, and established the hierarchy and so on. Then the ship was in good order. Lu Baishui always trusted others to do these things. A person's energy was limited, and naturally he couldn't be good at everything. If he chose the right people and didn't doubt them, he could save a lot of energy. The buy-in mostly carried people and also some goods. On the way to Dragon Island they would pass by some islands. Those islands were also under the jurisdiction of the Stormy Waves Path, so they weren't considered outsiders. In the past, when he was running business, he often traded with these islanders. Now on the ship, some were going to the islands and some were going there to do business. It was like buying a one-way ticket. In fact, when they recruited the sailors, they said they would trade along the way, explore the outside world, and maybe find treasures. The other ship was full of supplies. There were only about 100 seamen in charge of maintenance. According to Li Yunxin, this was a supply ship. The name of the ship was also appropriate. It was called Haitsong. Li Yunxin got off the ship in the morning and stayed in his room. When Lu Baishui rushed in, he was leaning against the window reading a jade slip in his hand. But this jade slip was transparent, and there were no words or pictures on it. But Master Lu was not in the mood to be curious about this. He closed the door behind him and angrily sat at the table in the room. He slapped the table and said, "That's too much." Li Yunxin leaned against the window. After a while he glanced at him. "Who made you so angry?" He was so angry that he laughed. "It's those 2 dog officials." Then with a rare angry tone he told Lu Baishui what had happened. Li Yunxin quietly listened to him and then slowly put the jade slip into his sleeve. He laughed. "So, it's interesting. I used to know that there was an emperor who didn't want to die, so he looked for people to go to the Immortal Mountain to find elixirs. It's the first time I heard that a governor would do such a thing." Lu Baishui frowned. "Humph. Those dog officials, there's nothing they can't do." Li Yunxin looked at him for a while. Until Master Lu was a little confused, he said, "It seems that Brother Lu is really interested in Jianghu. You don't know much about the court." Lu Baishui blinked. It seemed that Li Yunxin's attitude had calmed his anger a little. "Brother Li, what do you mean?" "I really don't like those things. In my opinion, this is a rebellion." Li Yunxin put his hands behind his back, stood up and paced slowly in the room. He looked rational and wise, like a gentleman. "Think about it, Brother Lu. The emperor is looking for the elixir of immortality so that he can live forever and see the imperial power. He, a governor, is looking for the elixir of immortality. What would he do if he found it? Be a governor for a lifetime? Be an emperor until he dies? That's a taboo." After saying that, he paused for a moment. "Oh, I remember now. No wonder. The emperor of the East Sea Kingdom is dead." During the Battle of Cloud Mountain, the fake saint of the Freemasonry urgently recalled the wandering souls that were sent to various countries. But those wandering souls were afraid that the emperors and nobles of various countries would commit suicide, so they took them away. After that, these people were kept in Su Yusong's sleeves. During the battle they were affected and killed. As a matter of fact, no one really cared when or where he died. They were just mortals after all. The emperors of the human world, the pinnacle of power. During the battle of the demons, no one cared about them like dust. In that case, even their souls might have been destroyed. But Lu Baishui seemed very confused. Where did Brother Li hear the news? The emperor is dead? Li Yunxin thought again, then smiled. Oh? You don't know yet. The world is going to change. It had only been slightly over 20 days since the Battle of Cloud Mountain. In this era where information was extremely undeveloped, not many people knew about this. Or even if they found out that the emperor, the empress, and a group of nobles had disappeared, they had to hide it. Otherwise, without a leader, there would be chaos immediately. After a few days, they would slowly take care of things and find a way to deal with it. Only then would they announce these things to the world. But they must have changed their faces. Lu Baishui was shocked by this news. He wanted to ask more, but Li Yunxin only said mysteriously, "Brother Lu, you will know when the time comes. I heard Brother Lu mention that you once knew a black knife hero Ing?" He had originally come to complain to Li Yunxin that he had been schemed against by a corrupt official. But then Li Yunxin said some very shocking news. Now he suddenly jumped to black knife hero Ing. This made Lu Baishui a little confused. But after saying this for a while, the anger in his heart gradually subsided. He sighed, "Yes. A few years ago in the Qin Kingdom at Mount Chiyun we got to know each other through a fight. He ran the Black Stockade Castle and could be considered a hero. But his way of doing things is a little strange." Li Yunxin thought of the first time he met Ing Juren. More than a little strange. This Lu Baishui really did not stick to one style of making friends with talented people. He smiled again. "Brother Lu, don't you know about his recent situation?" Lu Baishui was stunned and slowly frowned. "Brother Li, what do you know?" After saying this, he did not wait for Li Yunxin to speak. "I heard some news about him a few days ago. He seemed to be in trouble in the Yu Kingdom. So he asked the martial artists of the Central Plains to help him. But recently, there has been no news." "Brother Li." Li Yunxin nodded. The speed of information transmission in this era was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. The Yu Kingdom and the Donghai Kingdom were separated by 2 countries, so Lu Baishui did not know about Ing Juren's affairs in the Yu Kingdom. He said in a low voice, "The Black Blade hero Ing you know is now Prince Rong. When he was in the Yu Kingdom he did not run into trouble but started a rebellion. A month ago he had already swallowed half of the Yu Kingdom, and now he might have swallowed the other half." Lu Baishui blinked and looked at Li Yunxin suspiciously. "Brother Li." Li Yunxin immediately smiled. "Don't think too much. I'm not going to be his lobbyist. I have only met him a few times. I'm just lamenting. Brother Lu. Although you are unrestrained in the Jianghu, you are actually like a fish in a jar. When you have not run into a wall, of course you feel the world is vast. But you can never experience the feeling of being a fish in the vast sea or a bird in the high sky. For example, today, a judge from the stormy waves path can completely control you and you can't do anything about it. Have you ever thought of going out of the jar?" Lu Baishui frowned. He repeated the words, "the fish in the vast sea and the bird in the high sky," several times, then sighed, "Alas. Someone once said something like this to me. But I didn't take it to heart. It is not the first time I have encountered something like this, but I always feel something is wrong, right?" Li Yunxin said in a gentle tone. "The government governs the country, but it is difficult for the imperial power to govern the countryside. Only the local gentry can govern the countryside. Even if the government doesn't like people like you, they won't easily offend you. But today you were cheated of 20,000 taels of silver. Isn't it strange?" Lu Baishui's eyes lit up and he slapped the table. "Yes. Now that you mention it, I come to my senses. I feel there's something not quite right about it. So this is where the problem lies. Because we are going to slaughter a fat sheep, my friend." Li Yunxin slowly walked to the door, opened it a little and then closed it again. He said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, think about it. For example, the Emperor of the East Sea Kingdom is really dead. Then when the governor of the Stormy Waves Path heard the news, he wanted to rebel. That's why he dared to send people out to the sea to look for magic herbs. If he wants to rebel, he naturally needs to recruit soldiers. But where does the money come from? The sheep are the problem." Lu Baishui was stunned and frowned. "Brother Li, you said, but you also said that we need the local gentry to govern. But we don't need people like you. You are a coiled dragon lying in the shallow water of the Stormy Waves Road." Li Yunxin looked at him seriously and said every word with certainty. "You have too many friends all over the world. They may be helpful, but they may also be a disaster. Rebellion was like putting one's head on the waist of one's trousers. Who dared to take the risk? I am the governor of the Stormy Waves Road, so I will take you down first. I can eliminate the hidden danger and also increase the military budget. It is the best of both worlds. Brother Lu, let me say something first. Li Yunxin walked to Lu Baishui and sat face to face with him, looking into his eyes. The soldiers on the ship and that Wuxia may find a chance to kill you. Believe it or not. Lu Baishui's face became serious. He stared at Li Yunxin for a long time and then said, "You think so?" "I think so." Li Yunxin nodded. "Brother Lu, you can also watch. I know that Taoist priests, yeah. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. I didn't expect to meet him here." Lu Baishui was slightly moved, as if he wanted to say, "Why do you know everyone?" Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. "This is fate. I told you that there was a big change in my family. In fact, my parents were separated because of this person. He looks like a young man, but in fact, Brother Lu, don't treat him as a young man. He is insidious and cunning and very good at disguising. I suspect that he also came to the East Sea Kingdom and also wants to go out to sea, to find my mother." Lu Baishui's eyes widened. "Is that so?" "Heh. He is really pursuing me." This hero stood up, paced around in the room and turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Brother Li, if you trust me, tell me, why is he looking for your mother? What does he want?" A moment ago he was still angry because of the grievances he had suffered. Now that he heard about this, he became indignant because of Li Yunxin's misfortune. In Jianghu, loyalty was the most important word. He had already ruined his family, but he still pursued him. It was a taboo. Li Yunxin waved his hand and smiled. "Brother Lu, you are a good man. But this kind of thing, you'd better not get involved. You should have seen that. I don't practice pure martial arts. Wuxia is not an ordinary person. He wants to kill you, and if you happen to escape, he won't waste his energy to chase you. But if you get involved in the matter between me and him, I'm afraid you won't be able to get away." Lu Baishui looked at him. After a while he said, "Are you a cultivator?" Chapter 596. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief. "If I had a choice, I really hope I'm not one of them." Hearing this, Lu Baishui became silent. He had a premonition that this would happen, and now it had come true. For a moment he had mixed feelings and was speechless. But it was not because of anything else. It was because of one thing that mortals cared about the most. Life and death. The difference between a cultivator and a mortal was life and death. Maybe many years later Brother Li would still look like this, but he would be old and his hair would be gray. He was not afraid of death, but when he talked about this he still felt a little emotional. Especially when he got along so well with this Brother Li. The two sat in silence for a while. Lu Baishui said, "You didn't ask me to participate in these things. What about you? This Wuxia chased you all the way. How did you deal with him?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Since he came to the ship and you told me I'm in the dark, I have a way to disguise myself. After I disguise myself, I'm no different from an ordinary person in his eyes. We're about to go out to sea. When we get there, there will only be 2 people on our ships. This Wuxia usually has many eyes and ears. But now that there is no one else, I can take this opportunity to check if there are still spies on the ship." Then Brother Lu, Li Yunxin looked at him seriously. "Let's think about how to deal with him." Lu Baishui frowned and thought for a while. He said in a deep voice, "Okay." When he heard Li Yunxin say, "In his eyes, I'm no different from an ordinary person," he realized that the ordinary-looking Wuxia was actually terrifyingly powerful. Brother Li was a top-notch martial arts master and he knew some supernatural powers, but in his eyes he was no different from an ordinary person. He couldn't help but feel a little scared and worried. He misunderstood Li Yunxin's words. But this was exactly what Li Yunxin wanted. He had many reasons to disguise himself as an ordinary person to go out to sea. Putting aside what he said before, he wanted to understand the situation around Dragon Island first. There was also another reason. He felt that after the battle at Cloudy Mountain and the parting with Li Chunfeng, he had already escaped from Mu Nanju's sight. But he wasn't sure. Therefore he needed an isolation room. A relatively enclosed environment where he could make sure that there were no more spies around him. Going out to sea was a good choice. No matter how many people who shouldn't have entered the 2 ships, once they reached the vast sea, they would become a relatively closed environment. In such an environment he could slowly examine every suspicious person. After all that was done, he had truly disappeared from the sight of Southernwood residents or any other forces. Moreover, it was said that the Dragon Island was surrounded by weak water. Once in that kind of environment, even spies, and other strange abilities that he didn't know about would lose their effect. All he had to face was a group of ordinary people. Dealing with ordinary people was something he was very good at. However, this Xianxia actually wanted to go to the Dragon Island. It was within his expectations but also beyond his expectations. It was within his expectations. When Li Yunxin first met him, this Xianxia mistook the little demon protector for the organization he was looking for. Then when Li Yunxin talked to him, he repeatedly hinted to him, causing him to gradually develop the idea that this world is extremely dangerous. Don't easily reveal your identity, don't trust anyone. This kind of paranoid thinking caused Xianxia to immediately develop a strong sense of distrust when he saw Li Chunfeng, causing him to turn around and run away. And because of this kind of thinking, he would stubbornly believe in his own judgment and strengthen his own judgment. Therefore, sooner or later he would inquire about the little demon protector. But unexpectedly, this Xianxia actually went straight to the Dragon Island by chance. This was different from the impression that Li Yunxin had of Xianxia when they first met. The Xianxia he knew was very smart and cautious. He planted some kind of psychological suggestion in him, and it was also in line with his intelligence and cautiousness. But now Xianxia acted like a fool or a rash person, and directly went to look for the Lord Shinryu. Was it just because he heard that the Lord Shinryu was the backer of the little demon protector? Just based on this, it shouldn't be enough for him to risk his life. Something abnormal must have happened. What was the reason that caused a smart person like Xianxia to firmly believe that the Lord Shinryu was the person he was looking for? Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. A thought appeared in his mind. But this thought didn't just appear in his mind. It had been in his mind for a long time. He had experienced many things and also learned many details from them. The many seemingly unrelated but closely related details slowly made this idea clearer and clearer in his mind. And now what Xianxia had done had caused this thought in his mind to become even clearer. After thinking for a while, Li Yunxin raised his hand and rubbed his face, as if he was tired and needed to relax. Lu Baishui was about to call someone to bring a basin of warm water, but he saw that Li Yunxin had already put his hand down. He was shocked. Li Yunxin had changed his appearance. He had turned into a young man who looked about 14 or 15 years old. His appearance was also pleasant but not as handsome as before. It would make people's eyes light up, but it wouldn't leave a deep impression. Li Yunxin smiled and stood up. Lu Baishui found that his body also became shorter. "Brother Li, you are just a little trick." Li Yunxin smiled. His voice also changed. It was clear and sweet and he did sound like a young master. "Now, I am a merchant who is taking a boat to sea. I can see if there are any ghosts on the boat and how many ghosts there are." Lu Baishui was stunned for a while. "But when you boarded the boat, if there were spies, they should have already noticed you." Li Yunxin smiled again. "Isn't that good? When we are at sea, they have nowhere to run." After saying this, he cupped his hands to Lu Baishui. "Brother Lu, don't worry. I am here to keep you safe. I will go out and have a look." Then he went straight out of the door. Lu Baishui was left frowning in the room. "Does this Brother Li?" That smile just now was a little strange. Not because of the strange appearance but because of the strange temperament. He didn't look like he had in the past. Instead, there was a hint of evil in him. What kind of matter had he gotten himself involved in? Lu Baishui sighed and looked out of the window. It was still a cloudy day with gray clouds hanging low in the sky. It was said that there were many big and small whirlpools in the east of the East Sea, but he had never seen them. But now, he felt that the Whitewater town and the Danfeng harbor had become whirlpools. The ship he was on seemed to have become a small boat, and was about to fall into a bigger whirlpool. Chapter 597. At noon, the fleet composed of these two huge ships sailed out to sea. Some people from Whitewater town came to see, but they weren't very excited. These people, including many people on the ships, didn't think that this voyage would last long. Because the ship owner was Lu Baishui, a man with a lot of money. How could such a man not cherish his life like a fugitive? Also because there were soldiers on the ship, and they heard that the soldiers were escorting a young Taoist priest to find the fairy mountain. Such a person was probably just trying to cheat the governor of his money. He wouldn't really go to find the fairy mountain. They predicted that the two ships would return about 2 months later before the harbor froze. They were only half right. But this was a story for another time. They set off at noon and the ship gradually sped up. About 2 hours later they left the Danfeng harbor below sea level. About 6 hours later, when the sky was getting dark, the ship reached its highest speed. There was a strong wind on the sea, but it was a little warmer than on land. For some people who had never been out to sea, it was a rare thing. Those people were rare. And the 9th young master was even more rare. This willful dragon's son had stayed on land and in the Wei River for 1,000 years. He used to think that the Wei River was a magnificent river. Now that he saw the sea, he realized that there was such a vast body of water in the world. People were afraid of the cold, so they all stayed in the cabin. How could he be afraid of the cold? So he wanted to go out to sea to play. Before today, Li Yunxin wouldn't have agreed. The sea was vast and there were many aquatic creatures. There must be more demons there than on land. If this troublemaker caused any trouble, there would be trouble. But now that he knew that Xianxia was on the ship, he couldn't wait for the 9th young master to leave. You could say that he was naive or stupid. He couldn't defeat Xianxia and he would give himself away sooner or later. So he asked Lu Baishui to order people to clear out a cabin with ballast stones and seal it. He and the 9th young master used the escape method to enter that cabin, and told the 9th young master to leave the bottom of the ship and play in the sea. Then he started to do his own things. He moved to the bottom cabin. Most of the seamen and sailors lived in the lower decks, and some of the travelers and merchants also lived in the lower decks. At this time of year it was rare for big ships to go out to sea. Therefore, when people heard that Lu Baishui's ships were going to the east, many people came to visit their relatives and sell goods on the islands in the east. Originally he could only wait until the beginning of spring, but now he had caught a bargain. Thus they were not familiar with each other, which gave him a chance to sneak in. Just like that, another 4 days passed. It had been a very busy 4 days. In these 4 days this 14-year-old young master Li got to know many people. It was because he had just entered the world, and his whole body was filled with eagerness and enthusiasm. He couldn't wait to appear worldly when interacting with people. But in the eyes of a young man like him, being worldly probably meant spending money to make friends and showing off his family background. In the eyes of truly astute people he was an idiot. But who doesn't like idiots like that? After 4 days of hard work he had already spent several dozen taels of silver. He kept saying things like, "My father told me to have more friends and more paths." But he didn't know that not all friends were needed and not all money was given to friends. On the 5th day, since he was familiar with half of the people on the ship, he accidentally let slip that when he was young he once saw a stone tablet by a bridge, and on the tablet was a Taoist poem. It was strange to see such a tablet in such a remote place, so he stopped and read the poem on the tablet. But he knew that this poem was written by a great scholar after he abandoned his official position and lived in seclusion. Very few people knew about it. On a small mound next to the tablet, there was an old man with a sage-like appearance reading a book. So he asked the old man, "Sir, why is there such a poem here?" The old man put down the book and looked at him, saying, "This is a Taoist poem written by Zhou Xian in his later years. You know it at such a young age?" Then he put down the book, invited him to the house by the bridge to drink tea and talked with him again. Then he realized that although this young man looked young and inexperienced, like an ignorant and incompetent son of a rich family, in fact he was very insightful about the way of Li. So he said, "I have carved this poem for so long, but no one can tell its origin. Now that you know it, it seems that fate has come for us." So he took him as his disciple and taught him the art of prying into the secrets of heaven. There was a reason why Li Yunxin told such a story. When he was trapped on Cloud Mountain he chatted with Xianxia and Su Yusong for the first few days. Although there was a storm hidden in their laughter, he did learn some stories related to Daotong. In his story, Zhou Xian, who abandoned his official position and lived in seclusion, actually became a cultivator in the end. Moreover, he was extremely talented and his cultivation realm advanced by leaps and bounds. It only took him 446 years to enter the Grand Supreme Realm and become the 211th saint of Daotong. As for the old man on the mound, he was also very famous in Daotong. He was later the Grand Master of Langya Cave of Daotong and an expert who had reached the profound realm. The he in the story was called Lu Xingfu in the secular world. After receiving the old man's teachings, he had been walking in the secular world and had a son and a daughter. Later he comprehended the way in his old age and cultivated to the Grand Supreme Realm in 916 years. He became the 212th saint of Dao Tong. He was the master of the 213th sword saint Yu Meng. It was unlikely that mortals in the secular world knew this story. But cultivators must know. The people of Mu Nanju and the Freemasonry must also know. Because of the 3 people in the story, there were actually 2 saints. This was a very rare thing and could be considered an anomaly in the cultivation world. But now he was behaving like an ordinary person who didn't know anything. Once someone knew about this old rumor, they would definitely pay attention to him. Once they focused their attention on him, there would always be a flaw in their defense. So many people jokingly asked him to read their fortunes. Li Yunxin was not proficient in this, but he was proficient in psychology. He had been with this group of people for so many days. How could he not see who lived a hard life, who had a disharmonious family, who was timid and who might have a blood feud? So, with his glib tongue, when he talked about these people's past, good or bad, there was no one who was wrong. This group of people was really shocked. Only then did they know that this was really a little immortal. Soon the news spread throughout the ship. So, another 3 days passed. When the 2 giant ships reached the Chu Liao Sea, the first fish took the bait. Li Yunxin lived in a narrow cabin in the lower cabin. At midnight, the cabin door was gently pushed open. A woman with a headscarf and coarse clothes walked in. But her appearance could still be called elegant. Li Yunxin did not sleep. He lay on the hammock with his arms as a pillow. He did not seem surprised by the woman's arrival. So the woman stared at him expressionlessly and said softly, "People of Mu Nanju, or the Freemasonry." Chapter 598. Li Yunxin's cabin was on the upper floor, so he had a small porthole open. He had originally opened the porthole, so at this time faint moonlight shone in. He looked at the woman for a while under the moonlight, stretched and smiled. Oh, it's the wife of the Wu family. This Miss Wu from the Wu clan was only slightly less famous than him on this dragon warship. Because there was only one woman on the whole ship, and she was the wife of Wu Jiasong, a merchant on the same ship. The 2 of them were going to Chongji Island, where the wife of the Wu family's maiden family was. She was not ugly and could even be considered pretty. She was warm and cheerful, and Wu Jiasong doted on her, so she was quickly known by the people on the ship. These days she was the subject of many dirty jokes by the men on the ship. Occasionally Wu Jiasong would hear them, but he could only sulk and hope to get off the ship as soon as possible. After Li Xiaoxian's reputation spread, this woman also came to him to see her fortune. In fact, she was praying for a child. Li Yunxin asked about the details of her life like he asked other people, and carefully observed her, thinking that she should not be the person he was looking for. These days he used this method to check many people. But he did not expect that there would be a time when he failed miserably. This woman was. Or rather, she was one of them. His worries and speculation were correct. As expected, this ship had been infiltrated by the Freemasonry or Southern Wood House. These 2 organizations were really pervasive. But because of this, it proved that he was right to do so. These people mingled with mortals, and most of them were also mortals. It was difficult to find them with magic, so he could only use mortal methods to deal with them. Otherwise it would be like an elephant fighting an ant. Even if he had great strength, how could he beat them? So he said again, "You really hit it well. You said you were bought by Wu Jiasong when you were 7 and married him when you were 12. Are you lying to me?" The woman stared at him for a while, then closed the door and said, "It's true. My real name is Pan He. Don't call me the wife of the Wu family. Your Excellency, which side are you from?" Li Yunxin snorted with a smile. "If I said something wrong, wouldn't I be killed by you?" Pan He shook her head solemnly. "You are also a watertight person. If you hadn't intentionally told me that story, I wouldn't have been able to find you. Since it's intentional, it must be to lure me out." But he said that he was wrong and was afraid that I would kill him. "Your Excellency must be someone from Mu Nanju." Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. He originally thought that it would be the so-called servants of Southern Wood residents. Although he did think of the Freemasons when he was considering it, it was only out of habit. This was because after the battle on Cloud Mountain, almost all the wandering souls were abandoned by the so-called elders. With the death of the 2 false saints, the remaining wandering souls scattered in all directions. The leaders were all gone. Those who didn't know the inside story wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Moreover, they had no reason to keep an eye on him. But now that Pan He guessed that she was from Mu Nanju, it meant that she was from the Freemasonry. Damn it. Why are these things still haunting me? What did they want to do now? As soon as he thought of this, the smile on his face disappeared. His body swayed slightly and he jumped down from the hammock. Oh? So you are a member of the Freemasonry. Strange. All of you have already become wandering ghosts, so why are you still involved in this matter? Why are you looking for me? The cabin was narrow. Pan He slowly took a step back and calmly said, now we are no longer enemies. There is no reason for us to have a conflict. Li Yunxin smiled. I am a servant, I only care about doing things. It's useless to say this to me, no matter what you are here to do. In short, you will only hinder me. Die. Pan He immediately put her hand into her sleeve and took out something. She said calmly, if you want to kill me, then we will die together. And sink the ship. No matter what you want to do, you can't do it anymore. Li Yunxin frowned and pretended to hesitate. Then he saw that she was holding a black iron egg in her hand. This thing is called a hand grenade, hand thunder. Once it is triggered, there is nothing it cannot destroy within 10 steps, and everything within 100 steps will be destroyed. When Pan He said these words, her tone was a little stiff. Obviously, this was what the person who gave this thing to her said, and now she had learned it. I don't want to use it, and don't force me to use it. Your Excellency, listen to me first. Li Yunxin pretended to be afraid. Pan He thought that her plan had worked, so she put down the grenade. The Freemasonry is no longer the Freemasonry of the past. In the past, we only knew to serve the elders, and Mu Nanju was one of our enemies. As for why we were enemies, I am not very clear. Now that the elders are gone, of course, there is no reason for us to be enemies. Let me interrupt. Li Yunxin said, what is your identity in the Freemasonry? How can you say such things? What Pan He said was obviously not something a small character should know. It was like a low-level civil servant talking about how to interact with other countries. Of course, it was okay to talk in private. But to seriously think that he could make decisions was really crazy when compared to the ambassadors of other countries. Pan He smiled faintly and said confidently, in the new Freemasonry, I am in charge of the Donghai Kingdom. And Your Excellency, if I am not mistaken, should be the Donghai Kingdom's shopkeeper. We heard that you are also on the ship. We are a little surprised to see you tonight. Your Excellency is really a little young. There was also a Donghai Kingdom's shopkeeper on the ship. He cast the net and wanted to catch the small fish. He didn't expect to find 2 big fish swimming over. It was really, damn it. Li Yunxin was stunned at first, then smiled. You know how to read people. So, in charge? Nice to meet you. Tell me, what is your so-called new Freemasonry going to do? Pan He's expression became serious. Let's talk about your Freemasonry first. We have always known that your Freemasonry likes to use ordinary people, claiming to come from the masses and to the masses. Although I am not clear about the ultimate goal of your Freemasonry, I am clear about your position. You don't like the old Freemasonry, and in fact you don't like the old Xianmen either. You want the world to be a world of mortals, so you want to get rid of my Freemasonry first and then Xianmen, right? Li Yunxin blinked. He had naturally tried to figure out what Mu Nanju wanted to do, but he was not sure. However, he could see the inclination and position that Pan He mentioned. Mu Nanju indeed didn't like cultivators. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked Li Chunfeng to go to Xianmen to kidnap his mother. This could be confirmed from the Battle of Yunshan. Mu Nanju's people added fuel to the fire. They were ruthless to the Freemasonry, but they were also merciless to Xianmen. So he smiled mysteriously. It seems that shopkeeper Pan has done a lot of homework. So what about your Freemasonry now? A few days ago we no longer had any goals. The elders abandoned us and the Lord died, Pan He said. So the people's hearts gradually dispersed and we were about to fall apart. There must be a reason why a group of people gathered together. Money and fame are all reasons, but there is no way to gather people's hearts. So we have set a new goal. Li Yunxin thought for a while. Oh? What goal? It is similar to your Freemasonry's goal and it complements each other. Pan He said straightforwardly, exterminate the dragons. Li Yunxin was stunned for a while. Exterminate the dragons? Your Freemasonry doesn't like Xianmen because they exploit the people. The dragons are the same. Although the demons and Xianmen hate each other, they are of the same nature. They should be exterminated so that the mortals can live a good life. Moreover, that dragon head and dragon son are the culprits who almost destroyed our Freemasonry. Whether for public or private reasons, the dragons and demons should all die. This is our new goal. Shopkeeper should also know that the demons of the dragons have set up a little demon protection association in the Yi Kingdom. They say it is for the well-being of the demons but also to treat the people well. Sounds better than the demons of Xianmen in the past. However, it is just a change in form. At most, it is an improvement. However, if the mortals want a new world, improvement can't be changed. The old class must be overthrown. Demons, Xianmen, cultivators, they should all be swept into the garbage. When she said this, Li Yunxin hurriedly said, "So, what you said? Who said it?" It sounded more and more familiar. This shouldn't be the tone of the people of this world. Goddamn, he had worked so hard to bring down the Freemasons. Now they have become a sacred organization fighting for the interests of mortals. He worked hard to earn the identity of Dragon Son for himself, but now it has become a backward and reactionary class to be overthrown? What the hell is this? Are these people from the Freemasonry addicted to making trouble? Pan He paused. I read it from a book. Damn it. Li Yunxin sighed. Don't lie to me that I don't read enough. Which book says this now? Improvement? Class? Pan He finally smiled. This was the first time she smiled. But it was a very annoying smile. It was the kind of, I don't care about people like you who don't know much kind of feeling. A D person wrote it. But it's not a book that you can read. Although the Lord is not here, the foundation of Yunshan is gone. But we have stations all over the Midland. In the stations there are things that you can't imagine. For example this. She shook the grenade again. The name of this thing was exactly the same as what Li Yunxin knew in his previous life, and its function was also similar. But after a little investigation he knew it was not the same thing. This thing was not filled with gunpowder or explosives. It looked like it was refined with magic. It was not difficult to detonate it, just hit it hard. The thing inside should be very unstable. She brought this with her. How bold. Crazy. Li Yunxin snorted. You used to kill innocent people, how much killing you have done. But now you say that you are just and selfless for the well-being of the world. Do you dare to ask for such well-being? Pan He was still smiling. Same here. You have killed many people, haven't you? 500 years ago when the Qin kingdom changed dynasties, didn't you instigate it? How many innocent people have died? Besides, she stopped smiling. People like us used to work for the elders. We have experienced the feeling of not being treated as a human, and now we know what it is like to be immortal. It is useless for us to talk about these things. Please tell the owner of Munenju. I have come here to inform your esteemed society of this, and also for other matters. Forgive me for not accompanying you. After saying this she turned around to leave. But Li Yunxin laughed. Leaving in such a hurry? Are you going to find priests yet? While talking he took a step forward and reached out his hand to hold the door. The cabin was narrow and it was a long and narrow rectangle. His hammock was on the side near the window, and the space on this side of the door could only allow two people to talk, at most 2 steps away from each other. Now that he reached out his hand to hold the door, Pan He had nowhere to go. She turned around. She was very close to Li Yunxin and they actually became intimate and domineering. Pan He was startled. But then she calmed down and smiled. What, after walking on the sea for so many days, are you feeling lonely? Your young body may not be enough to satisfy me. Li Yunxin had turned into a young man and he was not tall. But Pan He was considered tall among women, and so she was about the same height as Li Yunxin. Now that she said these words, it was like a beautiful young woman talking to a handsome young man, and it made the atmosphere in the cabin a bit lewd. He smiled coldly. Manager, you misunderstand. I just want to ask. At this point Pan He suddenly reached out and grabbed his lower body. She still had a smile on her face. I also like young men like you. Li Yunxin immediately took a step back and said in a low voice, You want to die. 3 steel needles were inserted into the ground. They were the kind of horseshoe needles that women used for work, and they were as long as a finger. Now almost all of them were inserted into the wooden floor and only the tip of the needle was exposed. If someone's mind wavered and was caught by her, he was afraid that he would die a painful death. But Pan He still smiled. Manager, what do you want to ask? If you don't want me to leave, I won't leave tonight. As she said this, she moved closer to Li Yunxin. A cold light flashed between her fingers. Li Yunxin looked at her with a cold face. You want to fight? That means Xianxia is an important person to you. Why do you want to find him? I just want to tell him something. Pan He stopped. As if seeing that Li Yunxin did not stop her, she also stopped. She didn't want to cause more trouble. Manager, if you want to know, I can tell you. Tell him to go to Dragon Island and find trouble with Shinryu. Find trouble with Shinryu? Li Yunxin frowned. Why? Pan He was stunned. Then she slowly took a step back and carefully looked at Li Yunxin. Her face changed slightly. You are not the manager of East Sea Kingdom. Who are you? Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he raised his head and smiled. When did I admit that I am the manager of East Sea Kingdom? Little auntie, you think too highly of yourself. Pan He immediately raised her hand and did not say anything more. There was a buzzing sound in the air, and at least 20 steel needles shot towards Li Yunxin like a storm. After making this move, she pulled out a silver dagger from her hair bun and thrust it forward. Everything happened in an instant in this small cabin. No matter how skilled he was, he could not avoid it, unless he broke through the porthole. But then he would fall into the sea. But there was a crisp sound. The steel needles twisted and fell to the ground. Pan He's knife and wrist were also twisted. The body of young Master Li, in front of her, was stronger than iron, and the strength of her wrist made her fracture. The master of the Freemasonry was shocked, but he did not hesitate. Knowing that he could not win, he immediately took out the grenade in his hand and was about to throw it to the ground. But this hand was suddenly grabbed by young Master Li's hand. She did not see how he moved. But in the end, the impact of their wrists colliding caused the extremely unstable grenade to explode. Green smoke immediately sizzled out of the grenade. Pan He subconsciously narrowed her eyes, ready to welcome the death she did not want but could not do anything about. Young Master Li snatched the grenade in her hand. He stuffed it into his mouth. Her eyes widened in horror, both because when he opened his mouth he grinned from ear to ear and because of the 2 rows of sharp shining fangs in his mouth, but also because Li Yunxin closed his mouth and swallowed it. After 2 breaths he burped. There was a small flame accompanied by smoke, spitting out from his mouth and quickly dissipating in the air. He turned to look at Pan He and laughed. It's a little hot. But it's satisfying. Now let's talk about Xianxia and the manager of East Sea Kingdom. Chapter 599. Only then did Pan He realize that the person in front of her was not a human. But she could no longer move. An invisible force enveloped the entire room. She had walked right into the trap. Li Yunxin looked at her and smiled. As the person in charge of a country, your way of doing things is not rational or meticulous at all. From this we can see that your new Freemasonry is worse than before. My friend, you can't just do things on impulse and enthusiasm. You have to have a plan. Pan He opened her mouth and exhaled. Then he realized that he could still speak. With a trembling voice he asked, "What are you?" Hearing this, Li Yunxin blinked her eyes in surprise. He slowly took a step back and pointed at her from afar. You're asking me what it is. So you've never seen a demon before? Then what was your previous identity in the Freemasonry? Pan He blinked her eyes nervously as if her eyelids were twitching. I used to work in Huzhou. As expected. A small character who has just achieved success. Li Yunxin nodded in understanding. It seems that your association is short of talent. His tone was not small at all. Alright Pan He, it's good that you know fear. Next you will answer whatever I ask you and you may not die. There are only so many people on this ship. It would be troublesome to kill you. However, Pan He was still hesitating. After hesitating for a while, she finally gathered her courage and said, "Even if you are a demon, don't you hate the rule of the dragons? You little demons, aren't you the same as mortals? You're enslaved and bullied by the dragons and other big demons." But she didn't know what she had said wrong. Suddenly she saw a strange smile on young Master Li's face. He stopped talking. However, after some thought he said, "We can still work together. Just like with Mu Nanju, since you can pretend to be a mortal you must like the life in the human world." But the more she said so, the wider the smile on young Master Li's face became. Finally, the other party seemed to be unable to hold it in any longer. He waved his hand with a smile and was about to speak. At this moment, suddenly a man came in through the porthole. Pan He's heart skipped a beat. She thought that the situation had changed. Perhaps it was the people from Southernwood House. But he was soon disappointed. The newcomer didn't seem to be human. Rather than drilling in through the porthole, it would be more accurate to say that it penetrated in. The porthole was like an illusion to him. This person was a tall young man also dressed in white. However, his hair and clothes were all wet. As soon as he entered the cabin, he shouted, "Strange. The waters were too deep. Guess what I saw?" As he spoke, he shook himself violently like an excited puppy. With a loud bang, the cabin was immediately filled with mist. How strong was he? Not only did he shake off the water on his body, he even blasted the air. He took the full brunt of the blow, and blood immediately oozed from her eyes and ears. It was only then that the newcomer noticed He and was slightly stunned. Li Yunxin sighed, "You should be gentler. It wasn't easy for me to catch a fish. What if you kill it? Didn't I tell you to come in from under the ship? Someone saw you in my cabin during the day." But the ninth young master didn't take it seriously at all. He only paid attention to the word fish. He immediately became happy and walked to He. He grabbed one of her arms and put it into his mouth. At the same time he said to Li Yunxin, "You must have something to ask of me. Otherwise why would you give me blood food? Tell me, I won't refuse." Li Yunxin hurriedly said, "Stop, stop, stop, it's not for you to eat." The ninth young master blinked and closed his mouth. But his sharp teeth had already pierced into He's wrist and a lot of blood gushed out. 3 breaths ago, He was still trying to persuade Li Yunxin. But now she was trembling all over and couldn't say a word. How many people in the world could stand such a scene? Watching herself being eaten alive. When I said big fish, it's just a metaphor. It's not a fish meat. Can you stop making trouble and go out to play again? Li Yunxin sighed. Whales and dolphins in the sea are also mammals. What's the difference between them and human flesh? Can't you go and eat them? The ninth young master blinked and didn't open his mouth. Instead he quietly bit again. Immediately there was a series of slight bone-cracking sounds. But He didn't make a sound either because she was brave or because she was scared out of her wits. The blood gushed out faster. The ninth young master swept the blood into his mouth with his bright red tongue. He said vaguely, "Let me think." Li Yunxin sighed. He stepped forward and pulled He's wrist out of the ninth young master's mouth. The whole wrist had been bitten into pieces and became soft. If you suck all the blood, she will still die. This person is the ninth young master who is useful to me. Don't make trouble. The ninth young master curled his lips and licked his lips reluctantly. This taste is not bad. What do you want to do with her? Li Yunxin raised his hand and pressed a few acupoints on He's arm to stop the bleeding. "Nothing interesting," the ninth young master shouted angrily. "You don't allow me to eat her and you don't tell me. I want to hear it today." Li Yunxin looked at He, whose face was as pale as a piece of paper. Then he looked at the ninth young master. In the end he sighed again. He's a bad person. After I finish the interrogation, if she doesn't listen to me, I'll send her to you. Is that okay? The ninth young master thought for a while and nodded. That's reasonable. Ask me. I want to hear it. How bad is she? Li Yunxin snorted and looked at He. What kind of bad idea? He has killed many people. The ninth young master blinked his eyes. You call this bad? I have eaten many people too. Li Yunxin looked at him helplessly. Are a demon. That's a little different. What's different? The ninth young master blinked his eyes again. Didn't you kill me before because I ate people? Maybe he was lonely these days because he didn't have anyone to talk to. Or maybe he was really tired today and just wanted to chat. He actually talked to Li Yunxin about this. But Li Yunxin didn't scold him like a subordinate. Shinryu wanted the ninth young master to go to Dragon Island. Besides, he was still useful. He could only smile bitterly. I didn't kill you before because you ate people. It was because I wanted to save my own life. It was for my own life. Oh. Didn't this woman kill to save her own life? Of course not. Li Yunxin said patiently. She did it for something else. For money, fame, or an illusory belief, she killed many innocent people. The ninth young master became silent after hearing his words. Li Yunxin thought he had lost interest in this topic. So he turned around and wanted to ask He again. But the ninth young master said again, "That's no different. It's no different from you killing people to save your own life or me eating people. When he said this, his tone became serious, which was rare. It was as if a philosophical thought had arisen on the sea, and they were about to have a good talk about killing people. Or maybe, it was because he died in Li Yunqin's hands before. He always felt that his death was not clear. Although it was over, he still couldn't figure it out. What did I do wrong? Li Yunqin's mind was clear. She could vaguely guess what he was thinking. So he was stunned for a while and shrugged. Okay, ninth young master, I will say it. Actually, the original intention is very important in this kind of thing. For example, a person doesn't have the intention to harm people. But someone infringes on his interests such as life and property. So this person wants to protect these things that belong to him, so he fights back and kills people. Let's not talk about the laws of the world here. Then it is justified. This kind of legitimate power can be extended in Jianghu. Because you hurt me, there is hatred between us. Even if one thing is done, people will find you and kill you in the future. To a certain extent, it will be recognized by others. At least it is slightly more justified than killing people for no reason. As for demons, demons are not humans. Demons eating humans was no different from humans and livestock. There was nothing to criticize about it. For example, if the ninth young master didn't know me, it didn't matter to me who he ate. But after he recognized me, he ate the people around me and possibly me. That was a violation of my interests. So I had to find a way to save myself. So I killed you. Among men, it is a very proper thing to do. If I had killed you for fun without knowing you, it would have been a different matter. Do you understand all this? The ninth young master sat on the hammock and swayed slowly for a while. He frowned and said, I don't understand. Li Yunqin was stunned. What don't you understand? For example, I know you. For example, this woman is also your friend. I'm starving now. If I don't eat blood, I won't feel well. I want to eat this woman, but you won't let me. That means you'd rather see me feel sick. Aren't you violating me as well? For example, this woman killed many people she didn't know for fame and profit. But if those people don't die, she won't get fame and profit. If they don't die, aren't they violating her as well? Li Yunqin smiled helplessly. There is a line between violation and non-violation. It meant that you could make yourself feel comfortable and you could get whatever you wanted. But you must not violate other people's interests. You are a demon. You want to eat people. People are like livestock to you. Then I won't talk about people. I'll talk about demons. Now the person you want to eat is raised by another demon. If you eat other people, does that mean other people don't have food to eat? If you eat my friend, does that mean I don't have any friends? So it's wrong. I see. The ninth young master frowned. It's troublesome when people are involved. Li Yunqin smiled. Yes. If chickens and ducks talk about equality and the right to life, people will also find it troublesome and hard to understand. Now does the ninth young master understand? The ninth young master was silent for a while. Then he suddenly said, It's still wrong. Li Yunqin sighed. What's wrong? The ninth young master looked at him seriously. There is no such thing as not violating others. For example, there are 100 people in the world. They are neither yours nor mine. If you eat one, there are only 99 left. But I can eat 100 of them. You think you are doing your own thing, but there are fewer people for me to eat. There are only so many good things in the world. If you use them, there will be fewer for me. For example, this woman asks people to give her money. If people give her money, there will be less for others. For example, if the people of this world believe in us, the dragon children, then everyone will believe in you and the incense and wish power will all belong to you. But I will have less. We dragon's son. Hearing this, Panhe suddenly opened her eyes wide, showing a look of disbelief and fear. What you said is the logic of the little people, not our logic. Otherwise, why don't the monster kings like others to expand their territories around them? Because even if they don't belong to them, if others take them away, they will have nothing left to take. Speaking of this, the ninth young master's eyes suddenly brightened. Yes, this is the logic of the little people. We are not little people. Li Yunqin knew what the ninth young master meant by little people. It referred to an insignificant character, an insignificant person in the marketplace. He also understood what the ninth young master meant. An ordinary person with pitifully little power and influence. Living in a village or a city, the resources needed were also very limited. To him, the whole world was inexhaustible. When many of these people gathered together, they formed a human society. Everyone's needs were limited, so they only looked at the things around them. As long as the things around them were not taken away or taken from others, they would be safe. But for some people, for example, the emperor was not a little person. What they needed was territory and people. In their eyes, the world was like a cake that needed to be divided among a few ordinary people. Except for this cake, there was nothing else. If one person took it, there would be less for the other. A person would only be full after eating the whole cake. If he did not eat enough, he would be hungry forever. Under such circumstances, there was no such thing as not harming the interests of others. In other words, other people other than oneself were already harming oneself. He and the ninth young master were not little people. They were the apex predators that surpassed the ordinary people of this world and even the ordinary demons. The Shinryu, the Rock King, and the Sage of Xianmen were all such predators. Because of this, the justice and truth of the ordinary world were not applicable here. For such existences, the existence of others was evil. To want the justice and truth of these people, the evil of existence must be eliminated. Only slaughter and elimination were their principles of justice and truth. When all the bystanders were eliminated and only one person was left, then all the evil would come to an end. For example, invading other countries was an evil act. But when there were no more other countries in the world and everything belonged to the emperor, the evil act of invading would no longer exist. This was the justice of evil. Li Yunxin sighed. Yes, you are right. Between the ordinary people and the apex predators, there are two completely different systems of justice. But even the strongest person needs food, clothing, shelter, and transportation, and may be involved in the lives of the weak. When should the justice of the weak be applied, and when should the justice of the strong be applied? This is the fundamental problem. So we still need a standard, the dividing line between the two systems of justice. He paused and sighed again. I want to find this standard. He pointed at Pan He, ninth young master. Whether you eat her or not, it should be in the situation of the weak's justice. There are many people in this world and you can't eat them all. I don't like you eating people, but this is your nature and I don't want to harm you. So I suggest that the next time you want to eat someone, don't just grab them and eat them. There are so many evil people in this world, why not eat them? The ninth young master thought for a while and said, Then I still need to find out who are the evil people. Didn't you harm me again? Li Yunxin smiled. Yes, I am the one who harmed you again. But you actually tolerated this kind of harm for me. Ninth young master, this is called a friend. The new Lord Tonggan was stunned for a while and then blinked his eyes. So, friends are like this? The new Lord Tonggan was stunned for a while and then blinked his eyes. So, friends are like this? Yes, it is like this. Li Yunxin said. The ninth young master was silent for a while and then frowned. I still need to think about it. He looked at Pan He and licked his lips. Still need to think about it. Then he turned into a gust of wind, turned around and slipped out of the porthole. Li Yunxin turned to look at Pan He. The girl's eyes were full of fear and surprise. He smiled. What's there to be afraid of? I don't eat people, at least not raw people. Now tell me, why did you ask Zhou Xian to find trouble with the Shinryu? And why do you think he has the ability to find trouble with the Shinryu? Chapter 600. Pan He's lips trembled slightly for a while before she asked weakly, Are you really children? Li Yunxin stared at her helplessly for a while. His body suddenly shook and suddenly expanded. Pale green and slightly golden scales appeared on his limbs and cheeks. A snow-white mane and a pair of soaring horns also appeared. In the blink of an eye, his huge body reached the top of the cabin. The narrow cabin was filled with a terrifying pressure. Pan He's eyes were wide open and her forehead was sweating profusely. She saw Long Sun lowering his head and getting closer to her, and some mist rising from the gaps of his scales. Did you see it clearly? Pan He could only blink her eyes to indicate that she understood. She couldn't even form a sentence. This majestic and terrifying Long Sun stared at her for a while. Then his body suddenly shrunk back and he became a young boy again. Pan He's eyes rolled back and she fainted. Li Yunxin snorted, raised his hand and slapped her face, and woke up the Freemasonry's new leader of the East Sea country. While watching her look of confusion that quickly turned into fear, he said coldly, People like you Usually, when talking about the dragon sons, divine dragons, the general situation of the world, emperors and nobles, you can speak with confidence and composure. You are all people who regard fame and fortune as dirt, and you won't bat an eyelid even if you were to be attacked. But once the authority in your imagination is really in front of you, your courage will be smaller than anyone else, and you will kneel faster than anyone else. Today's Freemasonry is full of people like you. I'm afraid it will be over soon. He said sternly, Speak. Why do you think that priest Xia dares to look for trouble with the Shinryu? Although the last sentence was not loud, it was full of vigor. Pan He trembled in fear and her mouth seemed to not listen to her as she blurted out, because the elders in the association said, that person has the ability to resolve the world's calamity. With such ability, he wouldn't be afraid of the Shinryu. If he went to look for the Shinryu, the dragons might be heavily injured. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. How do you know he has such an ability? Didn't they say that person was Li Yunxin? Pan He blinked her eyes quickly. Sure enough, she told him everything she knew. That person escaped after entering Cloudy Mountain. The elder said, Then he's not that person. We just intercepted the information from Moon Enju. We know there's such a Xiaxing. Who is the elder you're talking about? An elder of Cloud Mountain? Oh, it's the elders of the various sects in the past, now they're elders. She was referring to the wandering souls that possessed the heads of the various sections. After being abandoned by the elders of Cloud Mountain, she became an elder again. Unfortunately, the value of this elder was too low. She knew some details but couldn't see the whole picture. That's why she felt that she could instigate Xiaxing to look for the Shinryu. But on the other hand, he has the ability to resolve the world's calamity. This coincided with the conclusion that Li Yunxin had come to after observing and probing Xiaxing when she met him. That Xiaxing does have some secrets. A secret of utmost importance to Moon Anju and the Freemasons. In the past, those people thought that he had it. By now they should know. They know that he, Li Yunxin, is a fake crown prince. He had long anticipated this day. Thus he had chosen the right side during the Battle of Cloud Mountain, binding many allies and forces for himself. Only then could he ensure his own safety. But he didn't know what those people in Moon Enju were feeling now. Li Yunxin laughed coldly. You're just a monkey in disguise. So when you find Xiaxing, what do you plan to tell him? I'll tell him that the Shinryu is the sky demon who came into the world. He wants to stop the calamity and kill the sky demon first. If he is really the person we are looking for, he will naturally believe it. Li Yunxin frowned. Anything else? Pan He's lips trembled violently. No, nothing else. Li Yunxin stared at her for a while. He was sure that this woman only knew this much, but his frown deepened. He knew that he was getting closer to a big secret. But the more clues and details he knew, the more confused and clueless he felt. For example, now he knew that Xiaxing was the person the Freemasons and Moon Enju were looking for. The reason why they were looking for him was that Xiaxing had a secret. The new elders of the Freemasons might have heard some rumors from the elders in Cloudy Mountain, so they thought that Xiaxing's secret could resolve the upcoming calamity. The calamity, when he met Grandpa D in Cloudy Mountain, Grandpa D said the same thing. At that time, Li Yunxin asked Grandpa D what the so-called calamity of the world was. Grandpa D told him, as if he was dealing with the natives of this world, that it was the invasion of the demonic realm. Li Yunxin hinted that he did not need to use these words to fool him. It was best to say it in words that everyone could understand. And this sentence seemed to reveal a flaw. Thus, Grandpa D quickly lost interest in him, knowing that he was not the person he was looking for. This meant that Xiaxing knew what the so-called calamity was. But the new elders of the Freemasons and the wandering souls did not know, and believed that the so-called calamity was the invasion of the demonic realm. So, for the time being, looking at the problem from the perspective of the new elders. If Pan He told Xiaxing, the savior, that the Shinryu was the sky demon who came from the demonic realm, then Xiaxing would believe it. Xiaxing was not a fool. Why would he believe such words naturally after hearing them? Li Yunxin thought that this could only mean one thing. The Shinryu was related to the demonic realm. In other words, the origin of the Shinryu was related to the demonic realm. As long as he knew what the demonic realm was, he would know the origin of the Shinryu. Or in other words, If Xiaxing met the Shinryu, he would naturally get a huge amount of information. Then this step was really a wonderful coincidence. Xiaxing mistook the little demon protectorate as the organization he should go to. He also mistook the god of Shinryu as the person he was looking for, and thus went straight to Dragon Island. And when the idiots of the Freemasons saw Xiaxing's actions, they felt that it was more evidence of the inside story that they knew. Thus, they planned to push Xiaxing again to make him believe that the Shinryu was the sky demon's invasion. But they did not know that what Xiaxing was thinking was completely different from what they were thinking. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin took a deep breath. Fortunately, he set this up in time. Just in time, he lured the Freemasons out. Otherwise, if this woman really went to meet Xiaxing later on, with Xiaxing's intelligence, he would have realized that something was wrong. Maybe he would have immediately turned around and returned to land. Because of this, he let out a light breath. Pacing around the narrow cabin, he stretched out his hand to push Pan He's limp wrist and said regretfully, "You were so sensible and sensible before, why did you have to suffer like this? Then tell me, where is the nest of the Freemasons now?" Pan He's face was already getting paler. When demons fought, it was not a big deal for them to get injured, bleed, or even break an arm or a leg. But for mortals, having their wrist bitten off was indeed extremely painful. She seemed to be eager to get rid of this pain. Her lips trembled as she said incoherently, In the former heavenly grotto heaven." Li Yunxin grunted and asked, "The heavenly grotto heaven where the 36 heavenly grotto heaven and the 72 sects are located?" "Yes. There's the book you mentioned before and also grenades." "Yes." "Ha." Li Yunxin smiled. "Wonderful. Why didn't I think of it earlier? Brother Pheasant." Immediately, another figure emerged from the wall. Pheasant appeared beside Li Yunxin and said uneasily, "Dragon King? You're flattering me by calling me that." Li Yunxin waved his hand. "You heard it. These days, use the treasure I gave you to restrain your demon aura, and keep an eye on Xiaxing from a distance. If anyone touches him, take him down immediately." Pheasant cupped his fists. "Yes." After saying this, he didn't leave. He knew Li Yunxin's mind, so he waited for him to deal with Pan He. Li Yunxin walked a few steps beside Pan He and said, "Have you killed anyone?" Pan He seemed to know that it was a matter of life and death after all. She gritted her teeth. "No." Li Yunxin was stunned and then laughed. "No? When you attacked me just now, it didn't look like you hadn't killed anyone before." "I only hurt people, not kill people," Li Yunxin snorted. "You keep talking about the world trend, but you don't dare to kill people. Your society is really doomed." After saying this, he waved his hand. Pan He immediately collapsed to the ground. She regained control of her body. However, the pain and fear made her unable to control her whole body, and she couldn't recover for a while. "Take her back," Li Yunxin said to Pheasant. "Use the spell I taught you to erase what happened tonight from her mind." But Pheasant hesitated for a moment. "Dragon King, won't you kill her?" Li Yunxin turned to look at him and stared at him. "Do I look like a homicidal maniac?" Pheasant shrank his neck and thought for a while. He felt that the answer to this question from Li Yunxin should be yes. There were many cultivators, demons, and mortals who died in his hands. But he didn't have the courage to say it, so he said, "I think it's troublesome to keep her." Pan He shrank against the wall and looked at Li Yunxin with wide eyes. Dragon King, please forgive me. I won't go against you anymore and I won't get involved in these things anymore." You can't believe her words. Dragon King. Pheasant glanced at her. "It's better to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots." Li Yunxin sighed and patted Pheasant on the shoulder. "Where does such a strong murderous aura come from? We'd better win people over by virtue. Go." Seeing that Li Yunxin had made up his mind, Pheasant also sighed. He lifted Pan He up and went out by climbing over the wall. About a quarter of an hour later he came back frowning at Li Yunxin. "Dragon King, I sent her back. But, even if I erase the memory of tonight, she will still remember you. It's still a big problem. I can't figure it out." In fact, this demon was a little worried. After his Dragon King and Lu Laodao went to Qin Kingdom and came back, he changed a little. When in Li Si's yard, Pheasant was slightly aware of it, but he didn't quite understand. Tonight he finally realized what was going on. He felt that his king had become a little kind and a little soft-hearted. Even now, his Dragon King was definitely more decisive and resolute than most people. However, he was afraid that if this change continued slowly, one day it would become bad. For example, now he actually spared some manager of the Freemasonry. In the past, this kind of person could not be killed with a raise of the hand. This made the pheasant feel very worried. Li Yunxin returned to the hammock and stretched her body. She said in a drawn-out voice, "Trouble, what I want is trouble. Now we have found out the manager of the Freemasonry, but there is still the shopkeeper of Munanju on the ship. I don't ask you to kill her because she is bait. When we are at sea, of course we have to fish. Besides, what's the rush?" Speaking of this, his tone slowly became cold. "Do you know what I have been doing these days?" Pheasant blinked. From Li Yunxin's tone he felt a certain familiarity, a certain coldness hidden under the calm surface. But this coldness calmed him down and made him feel at ease. "Dragon King has been telling people's fortunes these days." "Humph." Li Yunxin snorted. "Yes. He has been telling for a few days. What did he find out?" "There are more than 200 people on this ship except for a dozen merchants. The rest of the sailors are not good people. They have killed many people and rape and theft are even more common. Just last night there were 6 groups of people discussing how to rob and burn the ship. These 6 groups don't even know each other. This time Lu Baishui has suffered a big setback. Someone is trying to harm him." The pheasant was a little confused. It wasn't that he didn't know who was trying to harm Lu Baishui. He just didn't know why his Dragon King spent so much effort on this person. He was just a mortal. It must be the governor who is trying to harm him. These people might also be released from prison. Otherwise, how could there be so many of them in just a few days? Speaking of this, Li Yunxin stretched himself and exhaled. But he is a hero of the Stormy Waves Road. He has traveled all over the world and has seen so much. But now he has suffered a setback because of this matter. His IQ has dropped too fast. Tell me, is this normal? Pheasant was a smart monster. But if a smart person didn't have enough experience, he would also be stupid sometimes. Therefore, when Li Yunxin said these words, his brain couldn't keep up. He didn't know what the Dragon King meant. He could only say, yes. Is this normal? Li Yunxin glanced at him and laughed. Of course it's not normal. Lu Baishui is not a fool. Of course he can see it. But even so, he still has to go to sea. Before we set sail, I talked to him for a while on the ship. I told him bluntly that he was no longer the main character on this trip. The fleet had become Xianxia's. And I have some enmity with Xianxia, and it's not a mortal enmity. Before, he was willing to take me to sea because he also wanted to go overseas and see the world. Besides, we hit it off. But that day things were completely out of control. If he went with the ship again, he would probably die. He is a hero of the martial arts world with a family and a business. He also knew that his country's governor wanted to deal with him. So he went to sea with me. Pheasant, tell me, is this normal? Pheasant could only blink. So Li Yunxin smiled again and closed his eyes. Go. I need some sleep. Chapter 601. The next day was sunny. The vast and distant sky was as blue as the vast and distant sea. Wisps of white clouds floated in the sky, and the sea breeze became gentle. Strangely, it seemed that the further east they went, the warmer it was. When the people on the 2 ships set out, it was bitterly cold on the shore. But now they could take off their clothes and go out on the deck to bask in the sun. There were more than 200 people on the big ship, and many of them knew how to work with wood. Zhou Xian found a carpenter early in the morning and asked him to make a chair for him. There were ready-made wood on the ship, and he paid a good price and was popular. Naturally, work was done quickly. Therefore, at noon he was half lying in the bow of the boat. Actually, he was making a beach chair. He put a small stool next to the chair and put tea and food on the stool. The wind was calm, the ship was big, and the water was deep. So at this time it was almost no different from flat ground. The sun was shining and the sea breeze was blowing. It was a very comfortable environment. Some people were fishing by the side of the ship, not caring if they could catch anything. Some people were casting nets at the stern. This ship used to be a pirate ship, but pirates often worked as fishermen, so it could be a warship or a fishing boat. There was also a group of people around Zhou Xian talking to him. Actually, he wanted to find a god to ask him about his luck. But the god also had a temper. He said he was too tired and didn't want to see anything today. But although he didn't look at fate, his words were interesting. When he was excited, he would make an exception. Anyway, this group of people had nothing to do and talking to him was a relief. The merchant Wu Jiasong also came up with his wife. But his wife didn't get out of bed and broke her hand last night. She didn't look good. She and Wu Jiasong stood by the side of the ship looking over but didn't come over. Wu Jiasong seemed very happy. Although his wife's hand was like cutting out his heart, he was happy that he didn't have to mingle with those idlers. It was like drinking hot water alone, hot and comfortable. When he was happy he became generous. She stopped the peddler who was selling snacks on the deck. She picked up a few of the snacks and wrapped them in her clothes. She teased her wife to eat them one by one. Pan He frowned and took a bite of everything. She said that she was not feeling well and did not eat anymore. Wu Jiasong pitifully ate the rest, not even sparing the dregs between his fingers. Even if Pan He had something on her mind, she still frowned when she saw him like this. But in the end there was no other way. It had been like this for more than 10 years. There were people around Li Yunxin who knew about Wu Jiasong. Seeing him like this, he decided to bring his story to Li Xian, hoping that he would be happy enough to let him have a look. He used to have a big business. Didn't he have any assets under his name? Gambling houses, restaurants, inns. There were even 2 copper mines. 10 years ago I still ran with him on the road to the capital, ate and slept together. He was lucky enough to climb up to a high branch in the capital. Just like that he became rich. The one who spoke was also a peddler. From the looks of it he was just a peddler. He must have been very unsuccessful. But now because he was once familiar with Wu Jiasong he was proud. He said in an unconcerned tone, unfortunately he failed in a few years. That official in the capital fell and he didn't have a good time either. The money he earned for 4 or 5 years was all spent. His previous property was also gone. With that he returned to our Stormy Waves road. I started from the beginning. That's how I ended up with this problem. When the money is in my hands, I always feel that it doesn't belong to me. I try to save as much as I can. I don't know where he hid it. That little wife of his, he bought it when he went back to the Bien. I was in the Bien at that time. I also invited him to drink twice. And the result? He became rich again and forgot about me. Sigh. Rich people are busy and forgetful. When he said this, a group of people laughed and jeered, asking him to talk to Wu Jiasong. Otherwise they wouldn't believe that they knew each other. Li Yunxin also laughed with the group, but he was thinking about something else. It was the same as before. This peddler mentioned Wu Jiasong's background in front of Li Yunxin, thinking that he remembered it himself and said it casually. But in fact it was Li Yunxin who asked him to say it. He himself didn't notice the subtle guidance and hints. Because although Pan He was useless, since he could be in charge of a country in this new Freemasonry, he should have had some weight in the past. Such a person lurking around Wu Jiasong for so many years. For what? It was possible that he was just using his money and connections to inquire. Or he might have a more direct purpose. But after listening to this group of people talk for so long, Li Yunxin felt that the latter was not very likely. He let out a light breath, picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip, then said casually, "Strange. The further east we go the warmer it gets." The peddler just now was anxious to get away from the teasing of the crowd and immediately said, "Young Master Li, is this the first time you went east?" Young Master Li coughed. "Yes. I used to go west with my father. It wasn't because my father was willing to go. My father has a relative in the Tocharian kingdom in the west. He's my distant uncle. Sai, he forced us to go there to play. Actually, there's nothing fun in the west. Barbarian land. But there's no way, he. My uncle is a third-rank official in the Tocharian kingdom." Everyone knew that this was the first time young Master Li went out to sea in the east. After so many days, they had already understood this young master's temper. If he was good at something and experienced something, he would not be stingy to show it to others. If someone mentioned something he didn't know or experienced, he would immediately change the topic and start to brag about how he used to be with his father. But he was a young man after all, and he did have some ability, so they didn't hate him. Seeing him like this now, they could only laugh in their hearts. But they still said, "Yes, yes. After all, the east is a little different from the west. Young Master Li knows that in about a day or 2, we will reach the chain of the East Sea." After saying these 3 words, he saw Li Yunxin's face show a little doubt, so he smiled. The chain of the East Sea refers to the islands in the East Sea. It's considered the border that our East Sea country can manage. There are nearly 100 islands of various sizes. This time our merchant group is going there. He then lowered his voice. I heard that the owner of the ship, Boss Lu, wants to go further east in the chain of the East Sea, to find the Dragon Island. After we disembark, they still have to continue to the east. When he said this, someone seemed to not like him showing off like this, so he sneered, in a day or two. Brother Wang, I'm afraid you've forgotten about Aquarius Bay and that Sea King Lu Fei. When these words came out, the people who were talking and laughing just now were stunned for a moment, and all of them quieted down at the same time. It was said that the sea bandit Lu Fei's lair, Aquarius Bay, was between the chain of the East Sea and the mainland. If they were unlucky, they might really encounter it. These people also knew about it. These two ships used to be Lu Fei's ships. Chapter 602. This kind of thing was bad luck. Many people on the sea were superstitious, so after a moment of silence, they all spat and scolded that person for being a jinx. They quickly changed the topic and let it go. But after chatting for a while, they were eventually bored by that person and they slowly went their separate ways. The person who was showing off to Li Yunxin was about to leave, but he was pulled back by Li Yunxin. Hey? Where are you going? You haven't told me. Why is it warmer the further east we go, the warmer it is? This person was like young Master Li, after all, and he really liked to show off. He was about to leave. Hearing this question, he raised his eyebrows and squatted down again. A reserved smile appeared on his face. Young Master Li is proficient in metaphysics, but you don't know this. Oh, that's easy. Young Master, think about it. Heaven and earth, Qian Kun, yin and yang, they all have differences, right? Our land is Kun, heavy and nourishing all things, which is pure yin and yang. But the land is heavy and the sea is the opposite. It is like the sky and should be yang. Since one is yin and the other is yang, there must be differences. So in winter it is cold on the land and warm in the water. The further east we go, the more water there is and the warmer it is. This world was different from Li Yunxin's previous world. In his previous world there were also theories like yin and yang and 5 elements, but it had always been outside the mainstream scientific system. There were very few people who believed in it. Even those who often talked about it were only saying it casually. In his previous world, the theory of yin and yang and 5 elements could solve some problems, but most problems could not be solved or could not be solved for the time being. But here, the way of yin and yang seemed to be the mainstream. This peddler used yin and yang to explain the difference between land and sea. At first glance, it sounded reasonable and it also matched the actual situation. But the problem was that the water under Li Yunxin was also water in his previous world. He knew that there was another way to explain it. The specific heat capacity of water was higher. In winter, the temperature along the coast was slightly higher, but it couldn't be so high. But it could not have been so high. They had gone straight to the east and there was a compass on the boat. The latitude didn't change, but the longitude did. Logically, the temperature should have risen slightly, but it shouldn't have been so obvious. After nearly 10 days at sea, the temperature had risen by at least 10 degrees. At this point it was already above zero. As he thought of this, he heard the merchant laugh again. I heard that if you go further east it'll be like summer. It was a vast and boundless fog and he couldn't see the front anymore. If we pass through that fog we will arrive at the edge of the sky, the residences of the celestial emperors. In other words, the Dragon Island and the Immortal Mountain are both in the fog, he asked. The merchant smiled. That's right. The immortals are separated from us by the fog. Without great magic power you won't be able to pass through. At this point he waved his hand. Li Yunxin nodded. Goddess Penglai was sucked into the talisman. Over the past few days he often interrogated her in the dead of night. The demon said some things in bits and pieces, but Li Yunxin did not know if they were true or false. So these days he casually asked the people on the ship like before, confirming Goddess Penglai's words. This time it was printed. The demon previously said that Mount Penglai was in the thick fog, so they couldn't tell the direction. She also said that the Dragon Island was also in the thick fog, appearing and disappearing from time to time. She also said that the 4 seasons were like early summer, and the further east the hotter it was. Li Yunxin felt it was absurd, so he asked this question. He didn't expect the demon to be telling the truth. This was very strange. While they were talking, they suddenly heard the people at the side and the stern of the ship making noise. The people at the side of the ship were fishing, and the people at the stern were releasing the nets. It was originally a happy scene. But now they were hurriedly retrieving the fishing gear, as if something terrible had happened in the sea. Li Yunqin also stood up. Seeing that the merchant was stunned, he whispered, "Could it be the Sealine?" When he said this, there was some kind of blank fear in his tone. It was the first time he saw him like this. Li Yunqin frowned. "What Sealine?" The merchant ignored him. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly turned around and ran into the cabin, not even in the mood to show off. He could only walk to the side of the ship and look down. Sure enough, he saw the Sealine that the merchant mentioned. This name was very appropriate. In the dark blue sea there was a line. It looked about the thickness of a person's forearm and it was extremely long. Next to the side of the ship, it extended from the bow to the stern. Li Yunqin's eyesight was better than the people on the ship. Therefore he could see it very clearly. This thing looked white, but in fact it should be translucent. It was about 1 or 2 feet under the water, so it could be considered floating. But it was just floating, it really looked like a line. He didn't notice anything unusual about this thing. According to his thinking, it should be some kind of unknown sea creature. It should be a plant since it could grow so long. However, there must be a reason for the people on the ship to panic like this. He only looked at the side of the ship for a few seconds and someone behind him said, "Young Master Li, don't look, this thing is highly poisonous. Don't get splashed by the waves." For a moment, Li Yunqin didn't understand the connection between the poison and the waves. But soon he understood. He wasn't the only one on the ship who was at sea for the first time. A dozen steps away there were 2 men also looking down from the side of the ship. They looked like scholars, but their eyesight wasn't very good. Plus, the ship was very tall, so they tried their best to get down. It was useless, it was just a psychological comfort. But they weren't familiar with the people on the ship, so no one stopped them. At this moment the Sealine on the side of the ship slightly trembled. This slightly was relative to the length of the thing. With Li Yunqin's eyesight he couldn't see how long it was from the bow to the stern, so it must be terrifyingly long. For such a long thing, even if it trembled in a very small way, the force was still very strong. Boom. It was as if hundreds of thousands of them had rushed up from the bottom of the water, and the side of the ship splashed high. This wave was not enough to cross the side of the ship and hit the first class. But some of the water splashed on people. Someone shouted at Li Yunqin, but he didn't touch him. The 2 scholars on the side of the ship, however, had their faces splashed. The seawater was bitter and astringent, and it seemed to hurt their eyes. The 2 hurriedly shrank back, turned their heads and raised their hands to wipe their faces with their sleeves. At this moment they heard a few people who were slightly closer almost at the same time say, "Don't move, don't wipe, don't touch, Aya." But it was too late. They just raised their hands and wiped. It was like changing faces in a play. The 2 people's faces were blurred. It was as if the 2 people's faces were made of sugar paste, and now the heat was gone and it melted. The skin on their faces drooped and their eyelids drooped, looking extremely terrifying. Seeing the 2 of them like this, the people around them gasped. The 2 people didn't seem to notice the abnormality on their faces at all, and even made a strange "huh" sound, because their eyelids drooped and their vision was a little blurred. They thought there was a problem with the seawater entering their eyes, so they wiped again. At this moment, 2 bloodied faces fell onto the deck with 2 clattering sounds. The 2 people's faces were wiped off just like that. Their bloody facial bones and 2 bloody eyeballs were exposed. Everyone finally cried out in fear. With such a cry, the 4 eyeballs lost their support and drooped down. The 2 scholars didn't seem to feel the pain, but they also felt that something was wrong and reached out to touch their faces. At this time they could no longer see. With one touch they touched their own facial bones and their own eyeballs. After a moment of shock, they immediately let out a high-pitched scream and fell to the ground with a thud. Blood gushed out, quickly covering their entire faces, and then gathered into a puddle on the deck. One of them was so frightened that he lost his mind. He turned around and grabbed the side of the ship, flipped over and fell into the sea. Usually when a wound was soaked in salt water, the pain was excruciating, not to mention his face in the sea. Immediately he let out a scalp-numbing scream, but it only lasted for a moment before it stopped. The seawater only splashed a few drops on his face and it melted, not to mention that his whole body was submerged in the sea. The remaining scholar rolled on the ground. Everyone avoided him for fear of being splashed by his blood. With this commotion, a few officers and soldiers ran out of the cabin. Seeing this person, they were shocked and asked, "What's going on?" Xianxia, who had stayed in the cabin for a few days, also walked out. This was the first time Li Yunxin saw him after they parted in the mountain village. Li Yunxin could sense this person's aura in the cabin, but he didn't see his face. Now that he looked at him, he realized that his appearance had changed. Although his skin was still slightly dark, it was slightly whiter. He seemed to have grown a bit and his shoulders were wider. He had stayed in the mountains for more than 10 years, so his skin was dark and rough. It was fine to say that his appearance was average, but it wasn't too much to say that he was ugly. But now he had completely gotten rid of the evaluation of being ugly. Because his realm had increased. Looking at his aura, he should be in the emptiness realm. Once in the emptiness realm, a person would be reborn. In the past, Lu Gongzan looked like Lao Dao with gray hair at his temples. But after entering the emptiness realm, his hair and beard turned black again, because he had a longer lifespan and regained his youth. Xianxia was naturally young, so his body became strong. It was hard for a person with a good figure to not look good. Coupled with the well-tailored clothes he was wearing, he could be considered a talented person. This guy did look like a main character. Once he escaped from the mountain that had confined him for more than 10 years, he immediately caused a lot of trouble. When he first entered the world, he had nothing. Now he became a guest of the governor of the Stormy Waves Road of the East Sea Nation, and he also kidnapped 100 soldiers and 2 huge warships. At the same time, he also relied on the shallow cultivation method that Li Yunxin gave him to cultivate to such a level in just a dozen days. This kind of talent in cultivation was really terrifying. But the spiritual qi in the world was already chaotic. Naturally, Xianxia couldn't cultivate like the previous cultivators. He must have had the help of spiritual medicine. Li Yunxin guessed that the reason he went to the governor's office to play tricks was because there were spiritual items in the governor's office. This wasn't strange. All the officials and nobles in the secular world would have some treasures hidden in their homes. In the past, Daotong and Kenzo had residences in every major city, so it wasn't strange for them to befriend each other. But now, maybe this Xianxia had used up all of his spiritual items and wanted to improve, so he wanted to see if there was anything on Dragon Island that he could cultivate with. When he walked out, he looked calm and steady. When the soldiers saw him, they hurriedly saluted and lowered their voices. Li Yunxin could see that the soldiers respected this Daoist Xia from the bottom of their hearts. This kid was really good at winning people's hearts. So he asked what was going on. Seeing that this young Daoist Xianxia had a kind attitude, someone told him. Xianxia understood immediately, but he didn't go to the side of the ship first. Instead, he looked at the scholar who was rolling on the ground, his face full of pity. Why didn't anyone save him? Just leave him like this. The sailors explained that this kind of person's blood was also poisonous. The Selene's poison was terrifying. Once it appeared in the sea, the surrounding tens of miles of sea would have this kind of poison. Just a little bit of it would cause the flesh and blood to melt. If anyone else touched the blood of the poisoned person, they would end up the same. It had to be after the Selene disappears, and after 6 to 8 hours, this kind of strange poison would also disappear. This thing wasn't common, but it wasn't rare either. If a person traveled 10 or so times a year, they would definitely see it once. As long as they didn't disturb it, it would be fine as long as they stayed far away. Who asked these 2 scholars to court death? What could other people do? Xianxia heard this, frowned and thought for a while. He sighed softly. Even so, letting him suffer like this isn't a solution. He stretched his hand to the side. Give me the knife. After the bodyguard boarded the ship, he took off his armor and only wore cloth armor. He didn't bring his long knife, only a short knife. He hurriedly took out the short knife from his waist and gave it to Xianxia. Xianxia held the knife and looked at the scholar who was rolling on the ground. He couldn't bear it anymore and sighed twice before saying, "Help him free." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand and a short knife shot out with a buzzing sound. It went right into the scholar's forehead and nailed his head to the ground. This person's body twitched and twitched a few times. Then he stopped moving. Everyone was shocked by his decisive action and quietened down. Xianxia walked out of the crowd with his hands behind his back and sighed again. What a bitter life. He waved his sleeves. A whirlwind swept the corpse and the blood on the deck into the sea, leaving not a single trace on the ship. Everyone saw this scene and naturally felt that it was miraculous. They had long heard that there was a Taoist priest on the ship who went out to sea to search for the Celestial Mountain and Dragon Island. Now that they saw this, they knew that he was indeed a deity. Thus no one surrounded Li Yunxin anymore. They all went to talk to this deity. Compared to little deity Li, this deity was the real deal. Li Yunxin took advantage of the time when the group of people surrounded deity Xie to walk to the side of the ship and carefully looked into the sea. He quietly took a few steps back. Leaning against the side of the ship, he stretched out a finger and gently wiped it. He put it into his mouth and slowly sucked for a while coldly looking at Xianxia and the group of people. People couldn't see small and fast things, but he could. The scholar was rolling on the ground. Although he was far away, a drop of blood still splashed further and landed on the side of the ship. He tasted this thing and then turned his head to look into the sea. He didn't know when the sealine had disappeared. It seemed to have gone back into the deep waters. Chapter 603. He took 2 steps back to avoid the crowd. But just as he turned to the front of the ship, he made a soft hiss sound. There was some itchiness in his mouth. This feeling was both familiar and strange, making him startled for a moment. In his previous life he didn't eat well. It was considered a blessing to be able to eat for a certain period of time, but he couldn't pursue balanced nutrition. Thus, mouth ulcers were common, and his grandfather said it was because of internal heat. When the season changed, or if he was lucky enough to eat some fried food, he would feel his mouth and throat were slightly dry and itchy the next day. After another day it would hurt a little. The next 2 or 3 days would be the process of the pain and itch reaching its peak, and it would take another 4 or 5 days to recover. Although he was smart when he was young, he had limited access to knowledge. He believed his grandfather's words, thinking that it was because of the season changed or because it was hot or cold. When he grew up, he learned more and knew that eating fried food would cause internal heat and pain, or eating too many oranges would cause internal heat and pain. Perhaps it was because the surface of the fried food was hard. It was crispy when eaten, but eating too much would cause damage to the oral mucosa. If the injury was severe, there would be ulcers. The same was true for oranges. Too much acid would stimulate the mucosa and it would also cause damage. However, this kind of thing was quite controversial even in his previous world. The reason why he was startled today was because he had been cultivating since he was young, and his body was strong and he paid attention to diet and health. Thus, he had almost never experienced the taste of ulcers. Now that he had the body of dragons, he would not have such small injuries. Thus, now that he felt a familiar feeling in his mouth, many of the past hidden deep in his heart would come out, making him feel inexplicably complicated. There were very few people like him who had lived 2 lives. There were even fewer people like him who had lived a thrilling and magnificent life. On such a strange ocean, he experienced the emotions of his previous life in an unexpected way. It was also a wonderful thing. But the problem was, the poison in this drop of blood could actually sting his mouth. He ate Panhe's grenade. Apart from feeling a little choking, he felt fine. It was like drinking hard liquor in his previous life, and when the liquor entered his stomach would warm up. But now he was hurt by this thing. The poison was really incredible. Li Yunxin stood there with a slight frown. He smacked his lips as if he was tasting a fine wine, and felt that the pain seemed to have lessened a little. This was probably all the poison could do. But at this moment he felt someone looking at him. So he looked up. Lu Baishui was on the 2nd floor of the ship. When he saw him, he smiled and said, "Young Master Li, I heard that you can predict fortune and misfortune. Come up and calculate for me. What do you think?" She was looking for him for something. He looked at Xianxia. All right. There were more than 200 people on the ship and it was a mess. There were quite a number of people coming and going on the deck. He would not attract any attention if he went up. There was only one person to pay attention to. It was Panhe. Panhe's memory of last night was erased by the pheasant. She must feel strange. A perfectly fine person's wrist was broken, but she couldn't remember what happened. She must feel something was wrong. He didn't know what kind of spiritual medicine she had, but she didn't seem to feel much pain even after applying a thick layer of it on her wrist. Wherever Li Yunxin went, her gaze followed him from afar. But he didn't care. He went straight to the 2nd floor, stood by the railing with Lu Baishui and looked down. Xianxia was giving orders to several guards. Those sergeants listened and nodded repeatedly. A group of people surrounded him in awe, listening to his words as if they were listening to celestial music. If it were me, I would also kill them. Lu Baishui looked at Xianxia and others and said in a low voice, "If they can't be saved, they will suffer for nothing. When I was in Jianghu, I often encountered such things. Sometimes they were good brothers who went through life and death together. But something happened and there was nothing I could do. I could only bear the pain and cut my wrist. Brother Li, don't you think so? Li Yunxin looked at him strangely. Brother Lu, why do you suddenly say this? Lu Baishui turned his eyes to the sea. There was another ship in the distance. The visibility was good today and people on the deck of the Haizong could see it clearly. The Haizong was full of supplies for their eastward journey, and it had been sailing on the starboard side of the Haizong. Usually they used small boats and speedboats to communicate on the sea. Because we will reach the chain of the East Sea in a day or two. Lu Baishui narrowed his eyes. After unloading the goods and people in the chain of the East Sea and resupplying, Brother Li will go further east. Alas, the sea is not peaceful. For example, today is a beautiful day and someone suddenly died. I don't know how many things will happen in the future. Li Yunxin furrowed her brows even more tightly. There was a hidden meaning in Lu Baishui's words, and only a fool couldn't understand it. It would be boring to pretend to be calm. He said, Brother Lu, what do you want to say? Lu Baishui looked at the sea and was silent for a while, then turned to look at him. His expression was very solemn. A few days ago, Brother Li said that you would disguise yourself and go down to investigate Taoist Xie's movements. Now, how is the investigation going? Li Yunxin thought for a while and looked at him. She looked back at him and said, I found someone suspicious. In my heart I also had some plans. Brother Lu, do you want to hear it? Which one? Li Yunxin stretched out his hand and pointed at Pan He, this woman. Pan He had been observing him in the dark. But now he was pointing at her. She was shocked for a moment. After a while she hurriedly lowered her head, pretending that nothing had happened and hurriedly walked away. Wu Jiasong didn't seem to know what was going on, so he chased after her. Lu Baishui was slightly stunned. It was as if he thought that Li Yunxin was pointing at someone else. But now he was pointing at Pan He, so he couldn't help but be surprised. Li Yunxin asked, Brother Lu, did you find anything? Lu Baishui was silent for a while, then sighed heavily. Okay. Now that things have come to this. Brother Li, I won't hide it from you. I want to do something. Li Yunxin said with a smile, Brother Lu, please say it. I want to get rid of Taoist Xie and his 100 bodyguards. Lu Baishui stared at Li Yunxin with bright eyes. Brother Li is also a cultivator. If you have a conflict with him, can you protect yourself? Li Yunxin thought for a while. I can try. I can only protect myself. But why do you want to do it now? Lu Baishui let out a sigh, because we are almost at the East Sea chain. After saying this he turned around. He put his hands on the railing and patted it. I gathered these people on board, so I naturally arranged my own spies. Brother Li, you know that these people are not good people. I am afraid that something will happen, so I can only do this. These days. I know one thing. Taoist Xie's people are going to do it, on the day when we arrive at the East Sea chain. When we arrive there, as soon as our 2 ships stop, they will attack from both sides with the local government and take down the 2 ships. After all, we are overseas. Because of my identity, they may not be able to do it in the inland. But when we are overseas, it is easy to kill them. If I die in the East Sea chain, it will only be a shipwreck. These are the news that my people have given me these days. I originally thought that Taoist Xie would not cause any trouble and let them stay on the ship. But since they have such an idea, I can't just sit and wait for death. I can only fight to the death. Li Yunxin softly said, Oh, as if he was a little disappointed. After thinking for a while he said, Brother Lu, if you have such an idea, the government must be prepared. If they are well-trained soldiers, I am afraid that even 200 people on the ship are no match for them. Brother Lu, what do you plan to do? Lu Baishui said in a low voice, Of course I have my ways. But, Brother Li, after saying this he wanted to say something but stopped. After hesitating for 2 or 3 breaths, he seemed to have finally made up his mind. Brother Li. Just like how you hid something from me, I also have something to hide from you. Based on our identities and positions, we should not be friends. But fate makes fools of people. I actually think that we are congenial and can be friends. Actually, I am. Saying this, he did not continue. He patted the railing hard. Hey. Anyway, I will not harm you. Li Yunxin was silent for a while, finally shook his head and smiled. If that is the case, if Brother Lu did not say it, I would pretend not to know. But now that I have said it, how can I pretend not to know? Brother Lu, As he said this, he suddenly heard the people below the ship and on the deck making noise again. Suspecting that the ceiling had appeared again, he looked up. But he found that the height song had become shorter. This was his first impression. Looking closely, he found that it was not shorter but had changed direction. The height song was on the right side of the height song. At this time, the height song had changed direction and was heading straight for the height song. Both of them were huge ships. In order to avoid disturbances in the water, they were far away from each other. Today the sky was clear and the people on the deck could be seen clearly. A few days ago there was some fog on the sea, so they could only see the outlines. But although the distance was far, if the height song were to come here at full speed, it would only take a little more than a quarter of an hour for the two ships to touch each other. This kind of three-masted ship sailed mainly by the sea wind. But there were oars, two huge blades sticking out from the stern, 3 on each side. Usually they were kept in the belly of the ship and only put down when manpower was needed. Each blade was driven by 10 people. Human power was transmitted to the blades through a complex gear structure pushing the ship forward. But they could only play a supporting role. This was so that if they were unlucky and encountered a sea where there was no wind for several days, they could slowly row out of the ship. Now the 6 blades at the stern of the height song had been put down, and they were flying up and down with all their might to make the ship move faster. When the people on the deck of the height song saw the height song coming this way, they started to clamor, wondering what it was doing and whether it was going to deliver something. But after being noisy for a while, they all realized one thing. If the height song and the height song did not turn and maintain their current speed, in the end, the height song would crash into the belly of the height song. It was unbearable for 2 fishing boats to collide like this, let alone 2 huge ships. They were once pirate warships and they had a collision angle. What was worse was that the ceiling had just disappeared. This meant that for at least 4 hours, the seawater in this area would be terrifyingly poisonous. If the height song hit the ship and it flooded, there would be no way to repair it. They could only watch as the water accumulated or abandon the ship to escape. However, abandoning the ship would also mean boarding the small ship. The small ship would be tossed about in the seawater, and it would definitely be splashed with the poisonous water. It would still be a dead end. Realizing this, the people on the deck immediately panicked. Even Xianxia's face became solemn. Although the speed of his cultivation could be described as 1,000 miles a day, he was still just an emptiness realm expert. Only when he reached the transcendent realm could he fly, and he couldn't do it for long. If the ship sank, he could only try to kill the height song. With his current strength, he could suppress the rebellion on the height song. However, he only had 1 life. If the poisonous water splashed on the ship, he would die here. Li Yunxin turned to Lu Baishui and asked, "Is this your idea?" Lu Baishui stared at Xianxia and his bodyguards and sighed. "Brother Li is right. 100 soldiers are hard to deal with. Therefore we have to make them panic first." The ceiling appeared at the right time. Now that they are panicking and their attention is on the height song, we can make our move. With this, the commander of the governor's mansion's bodyguards came out of the 2nd floor of the ship with a few bodyguards. He looked down a few times and shouted a few times. What happened? The bodyguards on the deck also shouted back and more people heard them. When the brigade commander heard this, he was shocked. He looked around and saw Lu Baishui in the corridor on the 2nd floor. With a cold expression, he grabbed the hilt of the saber at his waist and strode over. He stopped 2 or 3 steps away from Lu Baishui and stared at him. "Captain Lu, what happened?" Lu Baishui frowned. "How can I ask the commander? The sailors we recruited were originally a group of desperados. How could I have thought that they would go this far and betray me at this time?" The commander was furious. He frowned and said, "Don't you know the people you recruited?" Lu Baishui sneered and interrupted him. "The people I recruited? Officer, since you work in the governor's office and accompanied that Taoist priest to the sea, you must be the governor's trusted aide. Don't you know if it was you who released these people from prison and arranged for them to board my ship?" The commander was stunned. Lu Baishui snorted again. "You and I are not stupid. Before such a thing happened, I could pretend that I didn't know anything. I would just treat it as a way to avoid disaster and treat the 1,000,000 taels of silver as a gift to the commander-in-chief. Till now. Humph, whether we can survive or not is up to you. Don't you have people on that ship?" At this time, the relationship between the 400 to 500 people on the 2 ships was very complicated. On Li Yunxin's ship there were people from the Freemasonry, Mu Nanju and Xianxia. According to Lu Baishui, there were also prisoners and spies arranged by the government. And the people arranged by Lu Baishui. It was really a mess. But what Lu Baishui said was obviously the truth. The brigade marshal was speechless for a while after hearing Lu Baishui's words. He blew his beard and glared at him for a while before cursing loudly, "Damn it, your mouth is really good. I'll deal with you later. What should we do now? Turn around now." Lu Baishui stopped laughing. He looked at the commander for a while coldly and snorted, "Tao? The height song is obviously prepared. If we turn around now, we may not be able to avoid it. If you want to live, you'd better wake up your soldiers right now. Even if our ship manages to avoid the collision, the height song will still have to move backwards. Then it will be a boarding battle. If we can get the height song and take it, we can live. Otherwise, let's all die here with our own thoughts." Among the remaining so-called sailors, there were a few who were genuine, but there were quite a few who were criminals arranged by the governor of the Stormy Waves path from the prison. But the real fugitives either became officials or nobles, or became heroes of the martial arts world. How capable could they be who had been thrown into prison and forced to come to sea? Thus chaos ensued. Nearly 100 people swarmed to the port side of the giant ship, and even the body of the ship seemed to shake. Fortunately, the soldiers standing on the side of the ship were not shaken off. The commander of the brigade brought more than 100 people on board. There were about 70 people on the Taowu and less than 30 on the height song. Now that the less than 30 people had been killed, the remaining soldiers had to maintain order and prepare to fight the enemy, which made it difficult for them to do so. In the end, he gritted his teeth, pulled out his sword and killed 4 or 5 people before he calmed the frightened rabbits down. Then he arranged the formation and asked Xie Daozhong, who was next to him, what to do. After doing all this, the height song was very close to the Taowu. The Taowu was dodging and the height song was also turning. Seeing that the height song was about to hit the side of the Taowu, the commander of the brigade shouted for his soldiers to stand firm and get ready to take over. They could already see the people on the opposite ship. There were about 100 of them and they were holding bright weapons in their hands. They seemed to be quite organized and their positions were also good, a sharp contrast to the panicked people on the Taowu. The commander of the brigade was stunned. He snatched the monocular from the soldier's hand and took a closer look. The weapons in the hands of the dozens of people in front were long and narrow swords of the army. Indeed, the 30 soldiers had been killed. But the problem was, where did the weapons in the hands of the remaining 70 or 80 people come from? It was not a random preparation, nor did it look like a private stash. They had hooks, huge axes, shields and everything else. It was a proper naval battle formation. Damn it. The commander of the brigade was shocked and he turned to look at the tower behind him. Lu Baishui had disappeared. The 4 soldiers with their swords were also gone, but there was blood flowing down the corridor on the 2nd floor. Even though he couldn't think clearly at the moment. But a chill had crept up his spine instinctively. They seemed to have been tricked. As soon as this thought came to his mind, he found something strange. Previously, when he was shouting on the deck to arrange the formation, the people on the deck were also running around and shouting. Although he killed 4 or 5 people to show his power and finally made them quiet down, they shouldn't be as quiet as now. On the deck, there were only 30 or 40 people left. Most of them were merchants and a few really timid sailors. The rest of the people were all gone. He immediately shouted, "Defend the enemy." After saying this, he hurriedly added, "Watch your back." But the Haiqing was so big. He and half of his soldiers were near the bow of the ship because he was afraid that the enemy ship would hit the bow of the ship. But when he shouted like this, the order couldn't reach every soldier's ears immediately. So the killing began. In fact, it was very easy. The ship was supposed to carry 200 people. Of them, 46 were merchants and the rest were sailors. The soldiers of the governor's mansion forced their way onto the ship, and there were more than 70 people. Now there were more than 30 people gathered at the bow of the ship, and the remaining 40 or so stayed in the belly and stern to defend against the enemy. First, the Sealine appeared in the sea, which scared them. Then they found that the Haiqing was going to hit the ship in reverse. Once they were hit into the water, they would die immediately. So the soldiers' attention was focused on the group of people at the bow of the Haiqing. They had seen the ugly behavior of these useless people on the ship. They didn't expect them to defend against the enemy as long as they didn't make trouble. But now this group of useless people was going to kill them. When the brigade marshal realized that something was wrong, the people hiding behind the ship rushed out with long spears in their hands. They didn't fight with the well-trained soldiers but just raised their spears and stabbed. In the first round, 7 or 8 soldiers who didn't even have time to turn their heads were pierced through. The rest, who were holding short knives, couldn't react in time, and another 7 or 8 died. When they finally realized that something was wrong and wanted to fight back, the number of people sneaking up on them was 3 times their number. Moreover, they weren't a motley crew and their cooperation was quite skilled. It was a sneak attack. They had the advantage in numbers, weapons, momentum, and terrain. How could they fight back? In just a few breaths, some were stabbed to death and some were pushed into the sea. Half of the soldiers on the Haiqing were gone. Screams came one after another, but it was impossible for the brigade marshal and Xianxia to rescue them. The bow of the ship, together with the 2 of them, was surrounded. They were surrounded by sailors on the ship. Most of them had been released from the prison on the stormy waves path. But now they looked solemn and calm, even calmer than the soldiers of the governor's office. According to Li Yunxin, the spears in their hands were 4 meters long, and they were carried by 2 people. The spearheads were sharpened and burned with fire. They were very lethal when they stabbed people, and it was a piece of cake for them to deal with soldiers who didn't wear armor. When a ship went out to sea, it always brought wood to repair it. Now, those wood had become weapons. What was more shocking was the people who used these weapons. From the beginning to the end of the incident, it only took a quarter of an hour. The soldiers of the governor's office, as well as Xie Daozhang, who didn't make a move and only watched coldly, were like turtles in a jar. It was hard to say for Xie Daozhang. As long as these soldiers with long spears charged together, they would be driven into the sea and corroded into a pool of blood. The brigade marshal seemed to be unable to accept this fact. He was dumbfounded and didn't know what to say. Then he turned his head to look at the Haiqing. The huge ship that was about to crash into them had changed its course. After another quarter of an hour, the 2 ships brushed past each other and went in the same direction again. The people at the bow of the Haiqing burst into cheers. The crowd parted and pushed more than 30 soldiers of the governor's office to the side of the ship. The brigade marshal suddenly realized what they were going to do and was about to say something. Plop, plop. Like dumplings, the soldiers who were tied up were pushed off the ship and fell into the poisonous water. The people cheered again, even drowning out the screams of the soldiers. At this time, the crowd on the Haiqing also parted. Lu Baishui walked out. He stood 5 or 6 steps away from the captives expressionlessly, hands behind his back, and stared at Xianxia for a while. But Xianxia was also expressionless. He looked at the brigade marshal and asked, "Lord Su, how does it feel to be a captive?" So the brigade marshal's surname was Su. The brigade marshal Su widened his eyes and gritted his teeth. "What a wicked person. How dare you? You dare to kill an official at sea. Are you planning to become a fugitive and join the pirates?" He said this with righteous indignation. But when the crowd heard it, they all burst into laughter, as if the brigade marshal had told a joke. Lu Baishui also smiled. When the brigade marshal and the soldiers looked at each other with laughter, he waved his hand. Everyone immediately fell silent. It could be said that orders were strictly enforced. "Join the pirates?" Lu Baishui said with a smile. "Join who? Join Lu Fei?" The brigade marshal glared at him. "You killed the soldiers of the governor's office." "Humph, I'm afraid he won't accept you." "Huh. So it's true." Lu Baishui turned around with his hands behind his back and paced 2 steps. The passage that the crowd made for him was only wide enough for one person to walk. Now he was pacing. Wherever he took a step, the people on that side would silently move aside. But the people behind him would immediately fill in the gaps, not giving the soldiers any chance to escape. Just 2 steps and Brigade Marshal Su was shocked. Such tacit understanding and obedience were rare even among the elite soldiers of the East Sea nation. What on earth was this? It said that the governor of the Stormy Waves Road secretly colluded with Sea King Lu Fei. Lu Fei helped him kill some small pirates, and then gave him 30% of the wealth from robbing merchant ships. The governor didn't really send the navy to kill them. So they lived in peace and benefited from each other. So it's true now? The brigade marshal stared at him. Nonsense. Lu Baishui smiled again. It's already this time. Brigade Marshal Su, Why don't you think about when and how these people were thrown into prison by you? Those who didn't know what he was talking about might be confused. But for Brigade Marshal Su, it was like a thunder exploding in his head. Just because of this sentence, he felt that he suddenly understood the cause and effect of the matter. The order he received was very simple. He led the soldiers to go to the sea with Zhou Xian to find the Spirit Mountain. On the way, he did one more thing. The governor wanted Liu Baishui's family business. But he couldn't do it on land, so he could do it on the sea. When they reached the East Sea chain, the local officials who also received the order would cooperate with the governor's soldiers on the ship to arrest Liu Baishui. If he didn't agree and wanted to cause trouble, it didn't matter. Among the 400 people on the ship, there were more than 200 who were pardoned from the governor's prison. They had already secretly formed an army and set up their subordinates. They promised that if they helped the army to do something, they would be given official positions. This way Liu Baishui bought the ship. The money would naturally go to the governor. He also asked him to gather enough people to go to sea. That would be suicidal. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? But at this time, Brigade Marshal Su realized that the problem was with those prisoners. Liu Baishui asked him when they were caught and why they were caught. They were caught after annihilating the original pirates on the 2 giant ships. Everyone knew that there was an internal conflict in Sea King Lu Fei's lair. The 2 pirate leaders brought these 2 huge ships to surrender. But they were all killed by the governor and the ships were captured. Brigade Marshal Su knew the inside story of this matter. The 2 pirate leaders who came to surrender. The governor recognized them. On the night they docked, he was the one who led the team to get them. They were tied up and sent to the governor's mansion. But once they entered the backyard, they were released and were politely invited in. They talked with the governor for half an hour and no one knew what they said to annoy the governor, so he rushed in with his men to kill them. It took a lot of effort to kill them and one of them kept saying things like, greedy. About 3 months after the execution of the pirates, another group of refugees came from the west. It was said that the villages near the old Demon Mountain suffered a natural disaster and couldn't survive, so they became thieves. But they didn't kill or harm people and only robbed everywhere. Like a swarm of locusts, they ate and ran. It happened near the provincial capital, so it was easy to catch them and put them in prison. The pirate leaders came with their ships in spring. The refugees were put in prison in summer. Now, it was only a few months later. Till now, Brigade Marshal Su saw the group of refugees behind Liu Baishui, and suddenly realized, what refugees? What natural disaster? They obviously pretended to be refugees to fight their way into the provincial capital. But why did they fight their way into the provincial capital? Thinking of this, he was shocked. Liu Baishui stood still. He looked at him coldly. This spring. 2 ships, 297 brothers' lives. Do you think no one will find you to settle this account? The brigade marshal was stunned. He suddenly clenched his sword and said, You are Liu Fei? Chapter 605. Liu Baishui sneered, You are not that stupid. The commander yelled again, No. Impossible. Liu Fei has been on the sea for more than 50 years. How can you be Liu Fei? Liu Baishui still sneered, Do you think Liu Fei is alone? The commander was stunned for a while. How many Liu Feis are there? Sea King Liu Fei is a title. It has been passed down to me for 1,000 years. Liu Baishui smiled. You dare to come to the sea without even knowing this. You are courting death. Hearing Liu Baishui's words, even if the commander didn't know how many people Liu Fei was, he knew that the sailors on the ship were actually pirates. Moreover, they were well-trained pirates who were even stronger than the imperial army at sea. At this time Li Yunqing was still watching. He had been watching since the Haid Song turned. He had been watching the people on the ship for the past few days and found some clues. For example, those people were discussing and plotting. There were also many people who said different things. They must have had unusual experiences in the past. However, he was not a god who could see the world clearly. From what he had observed, he only knew that these people were not good people. Many of them were discussing how to seize the ship. He didn't expect that they would seize the ship in this way. They didn't seize the ship from Liu Baishui but from the soldiers. This messed up his plan. He had wanted to observe Xiexing secretly. Then he would send him to Dragon Island and get more information from him. But now he and the soldiers were surrounded. This was troublesome. It wasn't Xiexing who was in trouble. It was Lu Baishui. Since the Haizong wouldn't crash into them, the environment on the Haizong wasn't dangerous, considering the venom in the sea. Xianxia was an emptiness realm expert. To him, emptiness realm experts were like ants. To emptiness realm experts, mortals were also weak. Xianxia's current body was tyrannical, far surpassing the so-called Vajra body realm of secular martial arts. When he mobilized his spiritual power, those wooden spears that fiercely stabbed his body would at most cause superficial wounds. The only weak points were probably the eyes and the lower body. However, he wouldn't easily expose these 2 points to others. If Xianxia wanted to escape or even counterattack, he could force his way into the crowd and start a massacre. The soldiers followed. Lu Baishui and the other mortals couldn't resist them. If he had extra spiritual power to write talismans and throw 1 or 2 into the crowd, it would have been more efficient. On the other hand, Lu Baishui was not stupid. Otherwise, Li Yunxin wouldn't have been able to see some clues until the day the 2 giant ships were about to set sail. He knew that Xianxia was a cultivator. So what preparations did he have? Li Yunxin hid behind the crowd and watched calmly. This crowd was none other than the traveling merchants. These traveling merchants really didn't know anything, including Pan He. While looking at Lu Baishui and the governor's mansion's soldiers, he was also paying attention to these people. With the steward of the Freemasons on this ship, there was no reason why the people from Southernwood House couldn't come up. There must be people from Munanju on the Taowu. Who was it? But while he was calm, others were not as calm as he was. The traveling merchants just wanted to take the ship to the East Sea chain. Knowing that there were soldiers on the ship, they weren't worried. Instead, they were happy and felt that this trip would be safe. They panicked when they saw the sealine, but they knew that they would be fine as long as they didn't get splashed by the seawater. But now they realized that they had boarded a pirate ship, and this pirate was so bold that he even killed the soldiers of the governor's mansion. An hour ago they were basking in the sun and fishing happily, but now they were on the battlefield. The timid ones were so scared that they wet their pants. Those who were a little braver also turned pale. These people recognized Li Yunxin. The one who was close to him whispered, "Little immortal, you told me that there would be a bloody disaster this year, but we would be able to turn bad luck into good luck. Are you referring to this trip?" Li Yunxin glanced at him. It was the guy who liked to show off. He smiled. "I was just joking. How would I know?" The guy's face turned bitter. "You?" As soon as he said this word, he heard the brigade commander shout, "Taoxia, it's time for you to take action." This sound scared the rest of his words back into his mouth. Pan He, who had been staring at Li Yunxin, turned to look at Xianxia. Xianxia was very calm from beginning to end. He looked at the situation on the ship coldly and didn't rush to take action. Even after Lu Baishui and Travel Commander Su had shown their cards, she only had a cold smile on her face, carefully watching Lu Baishui's every move. Li Yunxin knew that he was watching Lu Baishui's attitude. Even if Lu Baishui showed the slightest fear of Taoxia, Xianxia probably wouldn't directly conflict with him, because it meant that Lu Baishui knew Xianxia's strength. Xianxia had taken the dead bodies off the ship. But this was not enough to make Lu Baishui afraid. Xianxia would think that Lu Baishui knew his background. And if he knew his background and did this, it meant that he was prepared. There were other methods to deal with him. Xianxia and Li Yunxin were smart people. But their personalities were polar opposites. Li Yunxin was never afraid of taking risks. He was like a madman who wanted to die. Every time he took a risk, it was a reward for him. It also made him crazier. If he had complete emotions in his previous life, maybe he would be a big gambler. This time he took Lu Baishui's ship to the Dragon Island was a good example. He never thought that he could deceive everyone and find out the situation on the Dragon Island without leaving any traces. If he really did it, it would be the best. But if something happened or someone found out, it was no big deal, he just had to act according to the situation. But Xianxia was the opposite of Li Yunxin. He was extremely cautious and conservative. Not only that, he wouldn't hide in the mountains for more than 10 years. If it was Li Yunxin, he would have already run out. So at this time he didn't act blindly without thinking. But Lu Baishui didn't let him see through him. He sneered, "Take action? A Taoist who knows how to play tricks. Do you fools really think he is an immortal? Push them into the sea." After saying this, he immediately turned around. It was as if the fate of Taoist Xie and the army was already decided and he didn't need to pay attention to them anymore. So Li Yunqi knew that this guy really had other tricks up his sleeves. He sighed. He had thought that he had met a true hero. But he didn't expect that Lu Baishui was not completely honest. No matter what difficulties he had, he still hid his identity from him. Although Li Yunqi was the same, when Lu Baishui turned around and glanced at him, Li Yunqi still smiled at him. His eyes didn't move, but the corner of his mouth twitched. This kind of smile was called a fake smile. Chapter 606. Lu Baishui turned his face away. It seemed that he didn't want Li Yunqi's identity to be exposed, which meant that although he had changed from a land hero to a sea hero, at least he still remembered Li Yunqi. Although, he should also be suspecting whether Li Yunqi's identity was real or fake. He turned around and gave the order. The pirates around him were astonishingly fast. The second mate on the Taowu immediately shouted in a low voice, "Raise your spears forward." The pirates let out a low growl as they ferociously thrust their long spears forward. At this moment Xianxia finally made his move. He was expressionless at first, but he was still expressionless now. Suddenly he made a sword gesture with his right hand and slashed in the air. Thus, in front of him and the pirates, 10 small golden swords immediately appeared. Each sword was about the length of an adult man's forearm. They vibrated slightly and made a buzzing sound. Even the air around them was distorted. It was like a hot summer day and the air above the road was distorted because of the heat. But these 10 swords didn't bring heat but coldness. The pirates who were advancing were stunned, and even the second officer who gave the order was stunned. For these mortals who only heard about cultivators and immortals in legends, the sudden appearance of the golden swords in the air might be more shocking than blood and corpses. "I am a cultivator. I don't want to kill more people," Xianxia said coldly. "Step back." He was standing on the side of the ship. He made a sword gesture with one hand and put the other hand behind his back. He stood in the wind, his clothes fluttering, full of the aura and demeanor of a master. After saying a few more unfathomable words in an awe-inspiring tone, the spears that were originally pointed at him trembled and slowly retracted. The second mate also took a step back, looked at Lu Baishui and whispered, "For Lu, what should we do?" Lu Baishui turned around again and frowned at Xianxia. "Daoist Xie, this is between me and the governor's mansion. This is a grudge between me and the governor's mansion. You are a virtuous person, so why must you get involved?" After saying this, he paused and his throat moved. When he said the first few words, his tone was calm and composed, as if he was not the least bit afraid of the 10 light swords in the sky. However, this slight pause betrayed his emotions. Xianxia noticed this and snorted softly. "These people want to go out to sea with me to look for Dragon Island. If you kill them, who will serve me?" He flicked his fingers lightly. One of the lightsabers flew out and pointed at Lu Baishui's forehead. "I won't get involved in the affairs of you mortals. The people from the Haizong retreated to this ship. Leave the Haizong to us. I won't make things difficult for you." Commander Su called out, "Daozhong, this won't do. Who among us knows how to steer a boat? You may as well kill them all, save a few of the stewards. If you do not wish to commit murder, cast a spell on them all. Us brothers are not tired, we cut off their heads one by one." Lu Baishui ignored the brigade commander's nonsense. He looked at Xianxia. "You're making things difficult for me. I want to bring both ships back to Aquarius Bay. We can't lose a single one." Commander Su was about to call out again. Lu Baishui waved his hand and smiled. "But I also know that you have other things to do. How about we discuss a compromise? Daozhong, please allow us to kill these soldiers to comfort the souls of our brothers who died in vain. Then you will follow me to Aquarius Bay. I will find another ship suitable for going out to sea with sailors. We will respectfully send you to the sea to look for dragons. How about this?" Commander Su laughed loudly. "Bolsh **. Daozhong is an expert. Why would he and you lowly?" His voice stopped abruptly. Xianxia flicked his finger. The lightsaber that was originally pointed at Lu Baishui's forehead turned around and pierced through Commander Su's head without any resistance. That lightsaber did not stop. It drew a beautiful arc and returned to the sword formation. Commander Su was still smiling. His face was still full of mockery and disdain. He maintained this posture and fell into the sea with a splash. Then a series of gurgling red blood bubbles appeared. The crowd was in an uproar. Those soldiers were originally a little relieved. But with this sudden turn of events, these people couldn't wrap their heads around it. They didn't know why. Xie Daozhong killed the brigade marshal? But Lu Baishui reacted much faster than them. He immediately shouted, "Kill!" Xiexing killed Commander Su and turned his wrist again. The 10 lightsabers immediately returned to his side and stood upright to protect him. When the pirates heard the order, they were stunned for a moment and then shouted. Dozens of spears rushed forward at the same time. More than a dozen people were stabbed to death and pushed down. They retracted their spears and attacked again. None of the officers and soldiers on the deck were left. Lu Baishui sneered. Daozhong is really sensible. There was a faint smile on Xiexing's face, but it was also cold. He said, "There is no such thing as sensible. In my eyes there is no difference." Lu Baishui shook his head. "Of course there is difference. I promise to send you to the sea. When we arrive at Aquarius Bay, I will naturally send you away." Li Yunxin and the merchants around him witnessed all this. Their mood could be described as ups and downs. Of course they were talking about those ordinary people. First they saw the appearance of the pirates, and then they saw that the Imperial Army had the upper hand. Then the commander of the Imperial Army was killed by Daozhong Xie. Finally, Daozhong Xie conspired with the pirates. These people saw all this and felt like they were in a dream. They did not expect so many twists and turns. They could not understand why Xiexing betrayed them without warning. Li Yunxin just smiled and said to himself, "How can I be the protagonist if I am so cowardly?" But he guessed from the beginning that Xiexing would kill Commander Su. Based on his speculation about Xiexing's personality. Now it seemed that his speculation was extremely accurate. In other words, he had almost figured out Xiexing's temper. He was timid. This timid came from his sense of superiority. Li Yunxin also had this sense of superiority. The place I came from was much better than here. What kind of people have I not seen? With this sense of superiority, he would be proud of his identity. But because of their different temperaments, the same sense of superiority turned into two extremes. Li Yunxin was very bold. Since he had a sense of superiority, why should he be afraid of the country bumpkins of this world? It was a disgrace to his identity to live an ignoble life like the ordinary people here. Xiexing was very timid. "My life is so precious. It's not worth it for me to die in your hands." And the sentence, "in my eyes, there is no difference." Lu Baishui felt that he was saying that his group of pirates and Imperial Army were not good people. Maybe they would not keep their promises. Only Li Yunxin knew what he meant. He was saying that they were all just ants. There was no need to talk about morality with ants. Of course he would use them and kill them when he should. How could people care about the contempt of ants? Xiexing was now an emptiness realm cultivator. In the past, just a month ago, an emptiness realm cultivator with the same talent as him had the ability to kill all the people on the ship. The spiritual power in the world was endless. An emptiness realm cultivator could do many things with the spiritual power in the world. That Commander Su told Xiexing to freeze the people on the ship so that they could be beheaded one by one. Freeze was not easy to say. But it was still possible to use a talisman to kill dozens of people in an instant. However, the qi in the world was chaotic. Xiexing could only use the spiritual power in his body, supplemented by the spiritual energy that he had absorbed with great difficulty from heaven and earth. But he was such a cautious person. How could he use the power in his body to protect his soldiers and kill more pirates? He just wanted to go out to sea. It did not matter who he cooperated with. After boarding the Taowu, the Imperial Army had no value to him. In fact, it was the same for Lu Baishui. He wanted to take revenge on the governor of the Stormy Waves Road. Xiexing was not part of his revenge plan. If he could avoid more casualties, he should be happy to see it. Therefore Xiexing turned his wrist. The 10 light swords that were protecting him immediately turned into 10 small spots of light that revolved around him. He took 2 steps forward. The pirates made way for him until he reached Lu Baishui's side. His sharp eyes swept across the crowd, pausing on Pan He's face. He said to Lu Baishui, "I have a question. If I wanted to kill you just now, who would you ask for help?" Lu Baishui looked at the sea and smiled. "This is the first time Taoist priest went out to sea. It's not strange that you don't know. It is said that there is a fairy mountain above the East Sea. On the fairy mountain are Shinryu and the Dragon King. Since Taoist priest is looking for the Dragon Island, how could you not know? The Dragon King of the Sea doesn't like cultivators. If Taoist priest Xianxia used spells to kill people on the ship, it might attract the demon immortals. So Taoist priest Xianxia is smart. Xianxia's face changed. He took a step forward and got closer to Lu Baishui. Have you seen Xinryu and the Dragon King? Lu Baishui's body leaned back slightly, but he didn't step back. I haven't seen Xinryu and the Dragon King. But I know that someone went out to sea to look for Xinryu. He didn't say anything else. Li Yunxin let out a soft "ha" in the middle of the group of traveling merchants. He smiled. Someone went out to sea to look for Xinryu. In the ears of others, this sentence was just a casual remark. Anyone who lived in the East Sea Kingdom or even the neighboring countries along the coast should have such a thought. Every year there were indeed many desperate people who drank and went out to sea. They thought that once they found the dragon god, they could realize their dreams and come back from the dead. But if it was heard by someone else, Lu Baishui once told Li Yunxin that Shangguanyu went out to sea to look for Xinryu. And Li Yunxin told him that Xianxia was the villain who destroyed his family and chased him all the way here. At this moment, Lu Baishui said this to Xianxia. If what Li Yunxin told him was true, such a normal sentence would definitely attract Xianxia's attention and vigilance. He wanted to make use of Xianxia's reaction to see if what Li Yunxin had said to him was the truth. Li Yunxin smiled. Smiled again. Then the smile slowly froze on his face and he stared at Lu Baishui. Since he used such a reason, how could he not predict what would happen? Now that Lu Baishui wanted to see Xianxia's expression, he would definitely see what he wanted to see. Xianxia thought that Xinryu was the person he was looking for, so no matter who went to look for Xinryu, he would be moved. But Lu Baishui actually used what Lu Baishui told him before to test him. Li Yunxin stared at Lu Baishui for about 3 breaths and then took a deep breath. Then he slowly exhaled. He saw that Xianxia was indeed moved, because of what Lu Baishui said. Someone is looking for Xinryu. He slowly frowned. Who? Lu Baishui was silent for a while and then he smiled. Many. Just in Baishui town alone, there are 6 or 7 people who want to go out to sea to look for Xinryu. Who among us hasn't thought about it? Xianxia's eyes became cold. Are you making fun of me? Lu Baishui shook his head. Master Xia, don't worry and take the boat. When we arrive at Aquarius Bay, we will arrange for someone to send you to Dragon Island. After saying this, he turned around and was about to leave. But he didn't expect that Xianxia, who was calm and didn't want to cause trouble, suddenly changed into a different person. He flicked his finger, and the 10 light pearls around him immediately expanded and became 10 golden light swords again. 9 swords forced the pirates around them away, and the last one was hanging upside down above Lu Baishui's head. Make it clear, Xianxia said word by word. Who is looking for Xinryu? Do you know how to go to Dragon Island? It was originally calm and peaceful. But because of one sentence, even Lu Baishui didn't expect it. He didn't know that finding his own organization was Xianxia's first priority. And that night, Li Yunxin planted a seed in Xianxia's heart, making him even more wary of this world and the people in this world. Now that Lu Baishui asked this question, Xianxia, who was a smart person, how could he think of Lu Baishui as a simple pirate? He must think that Lu Baishui knew something about Xinryu. Otherwise, why would Lu Baishui say that someone went out to sea to look for Xinryu? Even Lu Baishui didn't expect this sudden change. At this moment, Xianxia's face was a little ferocious. The aura of a cultivator was completely released. It was like an angry beast facing Lu Baishui, making people feel the most intense pressure at the first moment. The pirates around them also felt the intense danger. They didn't doubt that if Master Lu didn't answer to Xianxia's satisfaction, he would probably die on the spot. Even if he was satisfied, it would probably be a disaster. This Taoist priest Xia was alone when he stood on the deck and killed Brigade Commander Su without warning. But now he became another person. Is this what a cultivator looks like? Lu Baishui's face also became cold. Xianxia wants to fight? Did you forget what I said just now? The monster in the sea. Where did you hear that from? Or did you know it from the beginning? But Xianxia didn't care about what he said now. It was like before, he was a lazy beast that didn't care about the ants crawling on his body. But now that he found out that the ants had something he wanted, why would he care about the threats? The sea was so vast. Even if there was a monster, how could it coincidentally come to this place? Who are you? After he said this, the light sword above Lu Baishui's head fell with a buzzing sound. The tip of the sword pressed against his head and cut his hair. Soon, blood flowed down along his temples. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.